I pushed open the front door of the mansion and felt a stale gust of air hit my face. My flashlight flickered across the foyer, picking up thick layers of dust and a few scattered pieces of broken furniture. There was a strange smell, a mix of mold and old wood. Right then, I knew I wasn't stepping into an ordinary place. I had studied local history for years, but I'd never actually spent time alone in a place so tied to rumors of hidden secrets and restless figures. I wanted answers, and I wanted them without someone else's filter. So I locked my car outside, dropped my bag in the hallway, and decided I was going to see it all for myself. My first day at the mansion started quietly. I walked through the entrance hall, moved aside a torn curtain, and saw a dusty corridor stretching toward a dark living room. The floorboards creaked with every step. My footsteps echoed in every direction. The living room had an enormous fireplace, bigger than any I had ever seen. I brushed away some cobwebs and found a large coat of arms carved above the mantel. It was the symbol of the old noble family who owned this place. The edges had cracks, and the colors were faded, but I could make out a shield and a crown. I heard a scuttling sound near the edge of the room, probably mice behind the walls. I ignored it for now. The main goal was to get familiar with the layout. At first glance, the furniture looked intact, just covered in sheets and dust. I found chairs with carved legs, tables with elaborate patterns, and walls lined with portraits whose eyes followed me no matter where I walked. I felt a little uneasy whenever I caught my reflection in their glass frames, like my presence was an intrusion. I tried to keep calm, but my hands felt clammy. My throat felt dry. I headed back into the corridor and discovered a staircase leading to the second floor. The banister was made of dark wood, and it felt sticky with grime when I ran my hand along it. Each step let out a strained creak. At the top, I found more portraits, mostly men and women in old-fashioned clothes. Their faces were stern, and their eyes seemed to stare right through me. One of them wore a rigid expression that reminded me of the old stories I had read, a stern patriarch who supposedly never left the house. They said he still roamed the halls looking for something he never found. I turned into the first bedroom on the left. It smelled stale and looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The bed frame was missing its mattress, and the window was sealed shut with boards. There was a small, simple dresser in the corner covered with layers of dust. I tugged the drawers open. They were empty. I checked the closet. Nothing but a broken hanger. I left the bedroom and tried the next one. Same result. Lots of dust, no sign of recent activity, no personal items. I spent the rest of the afternoon exploring. I found a library with tall bookshelves, most of them bare. A few leftover books lay scattered on the floor. They were coated in spider webs. I flipped through the pages. They were damp and smelled like old newspapers. My flashlight picked out a few lines about local genealogies, but most of it was illegible. Near the back wall, there was an old tapestry with the family's coat of arms again. The shield design was torn in places, like someone had pulled at the fabric. A small shape in the corner of the tapestry looked like some crest or insignia, but it was too faded to identify clearly. That evening, I set up my sleeping bag in the foyer near the front door. I wanted a quick escape if something strange happened. The floor was hard, and I felt the chill from the air seeping through the cracked walls. The night was quiet for a while, but around midnight, I heard a soft thumping overhead. It sounded like footsteps in one of the rooms on the second floor. I grabbed my flashlight and crept up the stairs. The corridor was dark, with only the moonlight shining through a few cracks in the boarded windows. I followed the sound toward the far end, past the bedrooms I had already checked. I reached a locked door. I jiggled the handle, but it wouldn't budge. When I pressed my ear to the wood, I heard a low creak. Then silence. I waited a minute or two, feeling my heart pound. My palms felt sweaty. My breathing got shallow. Still no more sounds. Eventually, I returned to my makeshift camp. The next morning, I decided to explore a bit more thoroughly. I brought a small crowbar and tried to pry open the locked door. The wood resisted. The hinges groaned. After a few tugs, the doorframe splintered, and I managed to get it open. I found a corridor leading to what looked like a smaller set of stairs going up to the attic. The air there felt heavier, more stagnant. My flashlight illuminated old picture frames propped against the walls. Their glass was broken. Some of the photos were missing, just empty spots where faces should have been. My throat tightened for a moment when I saw an identical coat of arms painted on the wall near the attic door. It was the same shield design, but the paint looked newer. I couldn't explain why. It just seemed less dusty, like someone had tried to preserve it. I opened the attic door. It led up a narrow staircase. The air was even thicker there, and I coughed a few times. At the top, I found a large space crammed with old trunks, furniture, and broken statues. I walked around, kicking aside bits of debris. One large trunk was locked, so I decided to leave it alone for the time being. I just wanted a quick glance of everything first. Then I saw something odd. A small table with a dusty candle holder. Beneath it, carved into the floorboards, was the family crest again, about the size of a dinner plate. It had faint grooves, as if someone had traced it over and over. I ran my fingers across the lines and felt them cut into the wood. I heard a slight scratching sound from the far corner, like something was moving around. I shone my flashlight in that direction but saw only shadows against a pile of crates. I backed away, suddenly aware of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. My pulse felt loud and unsteady. I left the attic and locked the door behind me, then returned to the corridor. I noticed that the symbol on the wall below the attic stairs now looked a bit brighter. It wasn't glowing in a dramatic way, but it seemed a little more visible than before. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if the morning light was playing tricks on me. I even touched the paint, but it felt normal. I went back downstairs, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling in my gut. That night I settled in the living room instead of the foyer. The large fireplace made me feel more secure, like I had a focal point. I lit a few battery-powered lanterns and placed them around. The room felt bigger when lit from different angles. The walls seemed to stretch into shadows. Around midnight again, I heard movement above me, maybe in the attic or one of the second-floor rooms. This time, I also heard a soft click, like a door unlocking. My eyes darted to the corridor. I flicked off my lantern and stood there holding my breath. The clicking stopped. Then there was a faint scraping sound, like a chair being dragged across the floor. My legs felt stiff, but I forced myself to move. I gripped my flashlight and walked toward the staircase, shining the beam as I went. Nothing was visible in the corridor. I looked up the stairs, but I saw no shapes or movement. Yet I felt a cold draft coming down from above. My skin broke out in goosebumps. I decided to check the second floor. When I got there, the corridor felt different. The air was colder, and the boards under my feet felt damp. I checked each room one by one. They were the same as before, except that one bedroom door was now open. It was the same bedroom I had seen on my first pass, the one that was empty, but now it had a chair in the corner. I hadn't noticed that chair before. It was a small wooden chair with an embroidered seat. Dust coated the armrests, but the seat looked clean, like someone had brushed it off. I aimed my flashlight at it, trying to see if there were footprints or anything else around. Nothing. My stomach churned with unease. The next day, I spent my time searching for any old records. I checked closets, opened cabinets, and flipped through half-rotted ledgers. Most were blank or unreadable. I found a series of coats, all bearing the same crest. They were hung in a wardrobe near the entrance hall. One of them still had shiny brass buttons. I also found a small stack of letters, but they were so faded that I could only make out fragments of words. They mentioned something about a family duty and the upper rooms, but not much else. Around midday, I ate a quick snack from my backpack. As I sat near a window for better light, I noticed something new. The coat of arms carved into the stone window ledge. It had a faint outline, and if I looked closely, I could see a slight glow in the lines. My eyes started to water, and I had to blink a few times to check if it was real. The glow was there, weak, but undeniable. By the fourth night, I felt the tension everywhere. My sleep was restless. Any sound woke me. The mansion groaned and settled at all hours. The slightest creak made me sit up in my sleeping bag. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a faint voice, or maybe it was just the wind whistling through the cracks. I stayed still, holding my breath, listening. Then I heard that clicking again, the same click I'd heard before, like a door's lock turning. I forced myself to get up. My muscles felt tight with fear, and my mouth felt dry. I grabbed my flashlight and went toward the noise. In the corridor, the door to the attic stairs was standing open. I was sure I'd locked it after my previous visit. I shined my light inside. The stairs were dark and I saw fresh footprints in the dust. They weren't mine. They were slightly bigger, spaced in a way that suggested someone had walked down recently. My stomach twisted at the thought. I climbed up slowly. Each step felt like it might break under me. I held the flashlight tight. At the top, I saw that same crest carved into the floor. This time, a faint light seemed to outline each groove. I knelt down. My heart thumped. I touched the carved lines. They felt warm against my fingertips. Then I heard a low shuffle from behind the stack of crates. I turned the flashlight that way, but I saw nothing, just old boxes and dust. The air smelled stale, like the inside of an abandoned closet. I stood up, feeling my knees shake. My breath came in short bursts. There was no movement in the darkness. No face. Nothing. But I felt a presence, as if someone was standing behind me. My skin prickled, and I hurried back down the stairs, pulling the door shut behind me. On the fifth day, I noticed a pattern. The coat of arms appeared in dozens of places around the mansion, and it always seemed a little brighter. In some spots, it was carved into a chair. In others, it was sewn into a curtain or painted on a wall. Even the corners of the mirrors had a tiny version of the crest. I began to wonder if I was losing track of reality, but I reminded myself that it was real. I could see it. I could touch it. My fear turned into a kind of obsession. I wanted to find out what the family had done here, why they used that symbol everywhere, and whether the patriarch was indeed wandering around. I began to focus on the so-called forbidden attics. I realized that there were actually multiple attic sections, not just one. The mansion was huge, with wings I hadn't fully explored. On the sixth day, I found another locked door near the back of the mansion. It led to a second attic staircase. This time, I saw fresh scratch marks around the doorknob, as if someone had tried to force it open from the inside. I pried it open with my crowbar. The hinges squealed, and the smell of stale air rushed out. A single window near the ceiling let in a thin beam of light. The space was full of more trunks and old furniture. And again I saw the crest carved into the floor. This time it looked more elaborate, with deeper lines and faint traces of color. When I looked at it, I felt a tingling at the back of my neck. That night I tried to sleep in the living room again, but I couldn't. Every little sound made me jump. I felt my heart pounding so hard that I thought I could hear it echo off the walls. A door slammed somewhere in the house. I sprang up, grabbed my flashlight, and raced into the corridor. The front door was still locked, but one of the side doors leading out to a small patio was open. I shone my flashlight outside. The grass was overgrown, and there was no sign of footprints in the dirt. I shut the door and slid the latch. My hands were shaking. Then I heard footsteps directly above me, in the room with the big fireplace on the second floor. My mind told me to ignore it, but my curiosity pushed me forward. I crept upstairs again, shining my beam of light around. The corridor was empty. I walked into the room with the fireplace. The ashes inside looked disturbed, like someone had poked at them. I crouched down and ran my fingers through the charred debris, but there was no heat, no sign of a fresh fire. When I stood up, I almost jumped out of my skin because the large portrait of the patriarch seemed tilted, as if it had been moved. My flashlight showed a hint of the crest in the bottom corner of the frame. It was glowing with a faint, unnatural light. I felt a burst of adrenaline. My stomach churned. I left the room, locked it, and headed back to my sleeping bag. By the seventh day, I could hardly eat. My nerves were on edge. My eyes felt gritty, like I hadn't slept in a week. I spent most of that morning walking the perimeter of the property, hoping to find a break from the claustrophobic feeling inside. The yard was choked with weeds and thorns. The mansion's windows stared at me like empty eyes. The whole place seemed to watch my every move. I found a few boarded-up entrances, but nothing else. When I went back inside, I noticed that the air felt colder than before. My breath came out in faint puffs. That night, I heard a scraping sound from the attic corridor. I clenched my fists and decided to confront whatever it was. I climbed the stairs, ignoring my trembling legs. My flashlight revealed dusty walls. The door to the attic was cracked open. I stepped in and aimed the beam around. A shape darted behind a trunk. I heard a shuffle, then a soft thud. My mouth went dry. I approached, forcing each step. Behind the trunk, I saw only shadows. Then the trunk rocked slightly. I backed away. The crest on the floor glowed, outlining every carved detail. I felt my pulse hammer in my temples. Then I heard a low sigh from somewhere near the rafters. I spun around but saw no one. My breathing turned shaky. I decided I'd had enough for one night. I left the attic, slammed the door, and ran downstairs. My body felt stiff, like I had run a marathon. Sweat soaked the back of my shirt. I could barely think straight. I threw a few items into my bag and moved my makeshift bed into the foyer again. I had planned to stay longer, but the presence in the house was too strong. I didn't want to risk losing my mind. I could feel that symbol watching me every time I blinked. The next morning, I took photos of the crests, the corridors, the attic entrances, and the old family portraits. I wanted evidence for my research. Then I left the mansion without looking back. My heart pounded until I reached my car. The driver's seat felt like a safe haven compared to those dark rooms. I still have those photos in my notes. When I look at them, I remember the nights of hearing those footsteps and seeing that faint glow. I remember the scratching sounds and the feeling that someone was always a few steps behind me. I went to that mansion in search of facts, but I left with more questions than answers. Yet, I'm certain of one thing. That place doesn't rest. The patriarch's presence is there, and the family's symbol seems to carry its own energy. I can't explain it in scientific terms. All I know is what I saw, heard, and felt. Even now, when I close my eyes, I picture that crest glowing in the darkness, and my pulse races all over again. I checked into the hotel late in the afternoon. The lobby smelled stale, like old furniture that hadn't been moved in decades. The clerk didn't say much. He only asked for my name and gave me a key. His eyes stayed low, and he barely looked at me. I felt uneasy right away, but I was exhausted from my flight and wanted to settle into my room. I didn't care about rumors I had heard. I needed a bed and a place to take a hot shower. That was all that mattered at the time. The elevator ride to the fourth floor was slow. The doors shook a bit and the overhead light flickered. I rubbed my temples and wondered if this business trip was worth the trouble. When I stepped onto the hallway, I noticed the threadbare carpet with odd stains. The lights along the corridor were dim, giving everything a dull, brownish tone. The door to my room looked older than the rest. The brass doorknob had patches of rust, and the wood had scrapes near the bottom. I pushed the key into the lock. It stuck for a second before finally turning. Inside, the room smelled like dust and cheap disinfectant. There was a single bed against the right wall, a tall wardrobe in the corner, and a small bathroom with a door that didn't close all the way unless I yanked it. The window overlooked the street below, but the view was blocked by a large brick building across the way. Everything felt cramped. I placed my suitcase on the small table near the bed and unpacked my work shirts. I planned to iron them later if I found an iron somewhere in the hotel. I went to the bathroom to wash my face. The light above the mirror was too bright, making the rest of the bathroom feel darker. I bent down to splash cold water on my cheeks. My eyes were tired, and my skin felt grimy from the day. When I stood up, I noticed something odd in my reflection. My face was there, but parts of it looked blurred around the edges. My hairline seemed smudged and my ears looked distorted, like the mirror was warped. I touched the glass, thinking it might be fogged or scratched. It felt normal. I wiped it again with a towel, but the reflection stayed the same. I shrugged. assuming the mirror was just cheap or damaged. I didn't think much of it and went back into the bedroom area. After I unpacked some clothes, I tried to turn on the small television mounted on the wall. It flickered for a moment, then shut off. I tried again, but it wouldn't power up. I tossed the remote onto the bed and sighed. I decided to head downstairs to ask the front desk if they had a different room or if they could fix the TV. When I opened the door, I felt a chill roll across my arms. It was sudden, like a burst of cold air, but I didn't see any vent nearby. I ignored it and walked to the elevator. The clerk wasn't at the front desk. The small back office door was open, but I didn't see anyone inside. I tapped on the counter and waited. The lobby was empty, and the heavy silence felt strange for a hotel. I gave up after a couple of minutes, then walked back to the elevator to return to my room. When I got back, the door to my room was slightly ajar. I was sure I had closed it. A wave of unease washed over me. I stepped inside carefully and looked around. Nothing seemed moved. My suitcase was still on the table, my clothes untouched. The bathroom door was open and the light was on, even though I was certain I'd switched it off. My palms started sweating, but I told myself I was just tired. I shut the bathroom light, closed the door firmly, and locked my main door. Night fell quickly. I ordered room service, but they said the kitchen was closed. That didn't make sense because it was only around 8 in the evening. I listened to the phone line crackle, and the person on the other end abruptly hung up. My stomach rumbled, but I didn't feel like going out again. I ate a protein bar from my bag and drank water from the bathroom faucet, which tasted metallic. I put on sweatpants and a t-shirt, turned off the lights, and got under the covers. The sheets felt damp, and the room temperature dropped. I felt goosebumps on my arms again. I reached for the thin blanket at the end of the bed, but it offered no real warmth. I tried to sleep. A faint whisper disturbed me. It sounded like my name, repeated over and over. It was too soft to be certain of the words, but it felt personal. My heartbeat thumped against my ribcage, and I listened intently. I thought it might be someone in the hallway, or maybe just the wind. But there was no wind in that stale building. The whisper persisted, like a soft chant that never paused. My throat went dry and I felt lightheaded. I forced my eyes shut and tried to ignore it. At some point, I drifted off. I woke up after what felt like a few hours, but it was only midnight according to my watch. The whisper was still there, somewhere in the walls, but I could also hear a slight tapping. I thought it might be an old pipe. The air in the room felt thick, and the dampness on the sheets seemed worse. My skin felt clammy. I sat up, turned on the bedside lamp, and looked around. The room seemed off, like the walls were closer and the furniture was at strange angles. I breathed shallowly, nervous about leaving the bed. Eventually, I got up and headed to the bathroom, hoping to splash water on my face again. When I flicked the light switch, the brightness stung my eyes. I looked at the mirror and saw my reflection. It was still distorted, but this time something else stood out. Behind me, near the shower curtain, there was a vague shape. It didn't resemble a person. It looked like a wavy patch of darkness. My hands started trembling. I spun around quickly, but the shower was empty. I whipped back to the mirror, and the shape was gone. My breath caught in my throat, and I could hear my pulse in my ears. I tried to calm down by washing my face. The water was ice cold, and my teeth chattered. When I dried off with a small hand towel, I felt that odd breeze again, brushing the back of my neck. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. I leaned close to the mirror, trying to see if there was any water damage or glare that might be causing the distortion, but nothing looked unusual on the surface. Still, my reflection had a slight blur around the edges of my shoulders and face. It reminded me of the motion blur you'd see in a bad video stream. I pressed my hand to my chest and took a slow, shaky breath. Back in the bedroom, I decided to open the window. Maybe fresh air would help, but the window wouldn't budge. I tried pulling up on the frame, but it felt stuck. I checked the latch. It was unlocked, yet the window wouldn't move. My arms grew tired and I gave up. The room felt trapped in a cold draft, but it wasn't coming from the window. It felt like it came from the walls themselves. I stepped into the hallway outside my room to see if there was any movement or if I could find someone who worked there. The hallway was empty. The elevator seemed stuck on another floor, and the stairs were behind a heavy door at the far end. I walked over, only to find the stairwell door locked. That made no sense for a hotel. My heart pounded. I went back to my room, not sure what else to do. I tried to call the front desk again, but the line was dead. There was no dial tone, just silence. I tried using my cell phone, but I couldn't get a signal. I dialed various numbers, but nothing went through. I paced around the small space, feeling claustrophobic. The walls felt like they were pressing in. I tried the television one more time, but it stayed black. I checked my watch again and saw it was just after 1 a.m. I grabbed a flashlight from my suitcase, turned off the overhead light, and opened the closet door, hoping to find some extra blankets or maybe a space heater. Inside the closet, I found a single hanger and an old suitcase that didn't belong to me. The suitcase was covered in dust. It looked like it had been there for a long time. My flashlight beam revealed faded initials on the side, but I couldn't make them out clearly. I felt a rush of cold air behind me again, and my heart jolted. I spun around, but nothing was there. My skin prickled. I stepped back, closed the closet door, and decided not to touch that suitcase. I heard that whisper again, soft but insistent. It sounded like my name repeated in a monotone voice. I opened the room door, ready to leave this place entirely, but the hallway lights flickered, and I saw shadows on the walls. They moved in slow, jerky motions. I couldn't see anyone casting them. I walked toward the elevator, but it was stuck on a floor above. I pressed the button several times. The display didn't change. The whisper got louder, and I felt a pressure inside my ears. I turned around, walked quickly to my room, and slammed the door. My entire body shook. My throat felt tight, and I couldn't stop trembling. I pulled the covers off the bed and wrapped them around myself, sitting on the floor with my back against the wall. I tried to think logically about what was happening. I told myself the old building had faulty wiring and poor insulation, that maybe I was hearing water pipes or outside traffic, but I couldn't ignore the mirror's reflection and those shapes behind me. My stomach twisted. I stared at the door, half expecting it to open on its own. At around 2 a.m., the overhead light in my room flickered. Then it went off completely, leaving me with only the bedside lamp and my flashlight. The whispering turned into a faint scrape like nails brushing against wood. I jumped up and aimed the flashlight around the room. The wardrobe in the corner loomed tall and its door was slightly open. I swear I had closed it before. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I stepped closer, reaching out to push the door shut. The wood creaked. Inside, there were only empty shelves, but I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I froze, shining the flashlight into the darkness, but nothing was there. I backed away and looked at the bathroom. The door was open again and the light was on, even though I had turned it off earlier. I moved toward it, one slow step at a time. My legs felt heavy and my knees wobbled. As I got closer, I heard a faint hum coming from inside the bathroom. It was a continuous tone, almost like a low whistle. I put my hand on the doorknob and poked my head in. The mirror's reflection was pitch black. I couldn't see my face or the room. It was just a dark, flat surface. I reached out and touched the mirror's glass. It felt ice cold. Then I caught a glimpse of something sliding across the reflection. It moved behind where I should have been, but there was only darkness. My chest tightened and I pulled my hand back, slamming the bathroom door. The voice whispering my name grew louder, and it felt like it was right behind my left ear. My eyes watered and I had trouble breathing. I grabbed my jacket from the chair and searched for my car keys. I wanted to leave the room, the hotel, the entire block if possible. I rummaged through my suitcase, found my keys, and decided I'd take the stairs, locked door or not. I went into the hallway and tried to force the stairwell door open. It didn't budge, but I kept pulling until my shoulders ached. The door stayed locked. I banged on it, hoping someone would hear me. No response. The corridor lights continued to flicker and I saw those shifting shadows again. They moved along the far wall, disappearing around the corner. I ran back to the elevator and hammered on the call button. The old mechanism groaned, and finally I heard a grinding noise. The display changed to show the elevator coming down. I felt a small surge of relief, even though my heart was still racing. When the doors opened, the interior light was dim. The elevator smelled like mold. I stepped inside, pressing the lobby button. The doors closed and the elevator rattled. Then it jerked to a stop between floors. The lights went out completely, and I nearly dropped my flashlight. I pounded on the doors and shouted. I felt tears well up, and my voice cracked. The whisper was in there with me, repeating my name over and over. A rush of cold air passed by my face. My breath caught, and I fumbled for the control panel. My fingers slipped on the buttons. Nothing responded. After a minute, the elevator jerked again and resumed moving. When it stopped, the doors opened on the same hallway I had left. I stepped out and saw my room door open wide. My breath shook as I realized the elevator had only looped back to this same floor. I couldn't believe it. My eyes stung with sweat and my shirt clung to my back. I pushed the button for the elevator to stay, but it closed and vanished to another floor on its own. With no other option, I walked toward my room again. The door closed by itself right before I reached it. My heart thundered in my chest, but I put my hand on the knob. It felt warm, almost hot. I thought about turning around, but I had nowhere else to go. I twisted the knob slowly. It clicked open without resistance. The inside of the room was darker than before. Even the lamp was off. I stepped inside, and the door closed behind me. The whisper faded, but I heard the faint scraping noise from the wardrobe. I took small steps toward the bed, still holding the flashlight. The wardrobe door was closed again, but I saw it rattling softly. I didn't know how long I'd have to wait until morning. I hoped daylight would make things normal. My plan was to survive the night, then rush downstairs and check out as fast as possible. I sat on the bed, hugging the flashlight. My teeth chattered. The cold air swirled around me again. I glanced at the bathroom door. It was still closed. Then I felt the mattress sink slightly on the other side. I jumped up, shining the flashlight on the bed. There was no one there, but the indentation remained for a moment before rising back to normal. My entire body felt numb with fear. I stood against the wall, facing the bed, until I noticed the first signs of dawn through the small gap in the window's curtain. The faint glow made the room look less threatening. I gathered my belongings in a hurry, stuffing them into my suitcase without caring about wrinkles. I approached the door. It opened easily. The hallway looked the same, but the lights were steady now. I rushed to the elevator, pressed the button, and watched it arrive. This time it took me straight to the lobby without stopping. The doors opened, and I found the clerk behind the desk, looking at some papers. I almost stumbled over my words. I told him I was checking out. He didn't ask questions. He just handed me a bill. I paid without reading it. Then I practically sprinted out the front doors, taking big gulps of the morning air. I never looked back. I got in my rental car and left as fast as I could. I didn't care about the meeting I was supposed to have later that day. I drove until I found another hotel in a crowded part of town. My hands shook on the steering wheel and I kept checking my rearview mirror. Part of me still felt like I was stuck in that room. But I knew one thing. I wasn't ever going near that building again. Even now, I don't understand what happened, but I know I never want to feel that cold air or hear that voice whispering my name again. I just wanted to get out. And I did. That's all that mattered to me then. And it's all that matters to me now. I never expected my apartment walls to feel alive. I'd only wanted a convenient place close to work, somewhere quiet that wouldn't drain my savings. A small unit on the third floor of an old building in the city center sounded perfect. I liked the tall windows facing the busy street, and I appreciated the short commute. At first glance, the apartment felt plain. The previous tenant had slapped white paint over everything, and the place smelled like old plaster and cheap disinfectant. I thought it was normal. I'd lived in older buildings before, and none of them ever gave me trouble. That first night, I felt hopeful. I told myself this place would be good for me. but something changed when I decided to repaint the walls. I noticed the paint peeling in a few spots. It was no big deal at first, just some cracks near the corners of the living room. I bought paint supplies that weekend. I thought a pale blue color would make the place look brighter. On Saturday morning, I moved my furniture away from the walls, spread out some plastic sheets, and got to work. I started scraping off the old paint so the new coat would stick better. After a few minutes, I noticed weird lines. They looked like faint designs, almost like scratches in the plaster. I stopped and looked closer. These lines formed odd shapes I didn't recognize. They were small, like symbols someone had drawn with a dull tool. They seemed too precise to be random cracks. I got curious and kept scraping. The more paint I removed, the more symbols I found. They formed a pattern, almost like a circle. I leaned in and touched them. They felt etched into the wall, carved in a way that made me think someone spent a lot of time on them. The area around these engravings looked smooth, like everything was deliberate. The paint layers were thick, so whoever covered these shapes did it on purpose. I felt a flutter in my stomach, like I was uncovering something I shouldn't, but it also felt exciting, like I was stumbling onto a secret. I scraped more. Each symbol connected to the next, forming a chain of weird glyphs around the base of the living room wall. There were smaller markings scattered here and there, but I couldn't figure out any meaning. I took some pictures with my phone. Maybe I could search online later. That evening, I decided to take a break. My arms were tired from scraping and my throat felt dry from paint dust. I wiped the sweat off my forehead and looked around. The living room was a mess of paint chips, old newspapers, and plastic sheets. The partial designs on the wall seemed to stare at me. I turned on the TV for background noise while I ate a quick dinner. After a couple of hours, I went to bed. I expected to sleep well because I was exhausted. But around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly. My heart was pounding. I couldn't figure out why. At first, I thought I'd had a bad dream, but I didn't remember anything. I stayed still in bed, trying to relax. That's when I heard faint scratches coming from the wall behind my headboard. It sounded like fingernails scraping concrete. It wasn't loud, but it was steady. Scratch, pause, over and over. I held my breath, listening. My mind raced with possibilities. Rats in the walls? Maybe old pipes? But the scratching had a strange rhythm. It felt deliberate, like someone or something was trying to get my attention. My skin prickled and I felt my pulse throb in my neck. I felt dumb just lying there, so I got up and pressed my ear to the wall. For a moment, the scratching stopped. Then I heard a faint whisper. It didn't sound like any language I knew. The voice was low and raspy, almost like it came from deep inside the concrete. I yanked myself away from the wall. My knees felt weak. I flipped on the lights and stood there, breathing heavily, waiting to hear it again. Nothing. The apartment was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I stayed up for a while, my eyes darting around every shadow in the living room. I eventually fell asleep on the couch with the light still on. The next morning I felt tense. I had work, so I forced myself to ignore the weird scratches and the whisper. I thought maybe my imagination got carried away. I left the apartment, grabbing a quick coffee on the way to the office. All day I felt uneasy. My mind kept drifting back to those symbols. At lunch, I did a quick internet search on my phone, using the pictures I'd taken, but I couldn't find any exact match. I found some references to older scripts or occult symbols, but nothing that looked just like what I had. By the time I finished work, I still had that knot in my stomach, and I wanted to go home just to see if anything else had happened. When I got back, the apartment smelled dusty, like the air was stale. I stepped into the living room and stared at the partially scraped walls. Everything looked normal enough in daylight, just a bit messy. I tried to shrug off my worries and continued my painting project. The deeper I went with the scraper, the more symbols I found. Some were bigger, carved with deeper lines, and others were small, tucked between the bigger shapes. It felt like a puzzle that stretched all around the room. My hands shook a bit, but I pressed on. I couldn't stop myself from wanting to see more. I found scratches that formed circles inside circles, lines that crisscrossed, and strange star-like shapes I didn't recognize. By dinner time, I had uncovered a good section of these engravings. I took more pictures, even though I wasn't sure what to do with them. That night I stayed up late. I tried watching TV, but I couldn't focus on the show. I kept glancing at the walls. Around midnight, I heard faint footsteps in the hallway outside my door. Then I heard a soft tapping on the wall near the kitchen. I stood up slowly, my pulse speeding up. The tapping moved along the wall, then stopped near the window. I walked over, flipped on the living room light, and checked the window. I could see the streetlights and some cars passing by, but nothing odd. Then I heard something behind me, like a sigh or a soft breath. My muscles tensed. I spun around, but I saw nothing except the walls, the half-peeled paint, and my mess of supplies. My heart hammered in my chest. I shut off the light, feeling too exposed, and I huddled on the couch in the dark, trying to calm down. I told myself I was just tired, but every little sound made me jump. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I talked to a neighbor in the hallway, an older man who lived 2 doors down. I asked him if he knew anything about the people who lived in my apartment before me. He gave me a concerned look and said that a few different tenants had come and gone in the last couple of years. They never stayed long. He mentioned that one of them told him about seeing shadows at odd hours, drifting across walls almost like they were moving from room to room. He shook his head and said that person ended up leaving in a hurry. Nobody ever explained the details. The neighbor said he hadn't had any problems in his own apartment, but the rumors about my unit were enough to make people uneasy. My stomach clenched. I realized I wasn't the first to notice strange things here. After that conversation, I couldn't ignore the symbols anymore. I wanted to cover them back up, to just paint over the entire thing and forget it. But I also felt this strange pull to see the rest. The caretaker of the building hadn't mentioned any of this to me when I signed the lease. I felt a little betrayed, but it was too late now. I was stuck here for at least a year unless I broke the contract. I decided to keep scraping and see if there was an end to these carvings. Maybe if I understood the full scope, I could figure out a way to get rid of them. I took a fresh scraper and got back to work. Around the edges of each symbol, I noticed tiny grooves, like someone used a thin blade to carve lines into the plaster. My fingertips got raw from holding the scraper for hours. I felt dust clinging to my clothes and hair. The room felt colder than before, even though the heater was on. My breath felt shallow and my heart thumped every time I uncovered a new shape. As the symbols connected, I started seeing repeating patterns across the living room walls, almost encircling the entire space. I didn't see any pictures or drawings of animals or people, just these looping lines and geometric shapes. I wondered if it was some kind of old ritual marking. I could sense that it was deliberate, like a code left behind. That night I heard the scratching again. It came from different parts of the wall, sometimes near the corner, sometimes high up by the ceiling. I walked around with a flashlight, pressing my ear to the surfaces. It sounded like nails scraping inside the concrete, inching closer. My pulse raced, and my palms got sweaty. A few times I heard whispers. They were soft, but I recognized the same guttural tone from the other night. It rose and fell, like chanting. I couldn't make out any words. My skin broke out in goosebumps and my hair stood on end. I felt an overwhelming urge to leave, but my mind was buzzing with questions. I tried to record the sounds on my phone, but every time I played it back, all I heard was static and faint clicks. No voices, no chanting. Over the next few days, my sleep schedule fell apart. I had trouble focusing at work. People asked if I was feeling sick. My eyes were bloodshot, and I felt constant tension in my neck and shoulders. At night, I stayed alert, listening for anything out of place. The walls almost seemed to breathe. The symbol lines in the living room gave me a constant sense of unease. One night I saw a shadow pass across the wall, but there was no one else in the apartment. It seemed to merge with the symbols like it was stepping through them. My heart felt like it would explode. I yelled out, but the shadow vanished. I bolted into the hallway, flipping on every light. I searched each room, my hands shaking, but there was nothing. I stood there sweating, fear clutching my chest. I realized this wasn't just in my imagination. Something else was here, something aware of me. I started talking to more neighbors. One woman said she heard about an older rumor that the building was once some kind of meeting place for a group that did rituals. She didn't know details, only that there were stories about hidden carvings and odd gatherings in the middle of the night. She said some people claimed to hear voices in the walls. She shrugged, like she wasn't sure if she believed it, but she told me to be careful. That same day I tried calling the landlord, but he acted clueless. He said he knew nothing about weird symbols or suspicious activity. When I pressed him, he told me the building was old and that I should mind my own business. I heard the nervousness in his voice, though. He hung up as soon as he could. At this point, I felt a heavy pressure in my chest every time I stepped into the apartment. I jumped at the slightest sound. I tried blasting music or wearing headphones to block out the scratching, but it never fully worked. The scratching and whispers got louder when the lights were off. They seemed to push right into my head. Sometimes I felt a presence standing behind me, though I never saw it clearly. I'd spin around and only see the walls and their markings. My hands shook constantly, and my breathing turned shallow whenever darkness fell. I started leaving lamps on all night, but it only made the shadows in the corners more obvious. One evening, I decided to test something. I went into the bedroom and placed my ear against the wall. I stayed still for several minutes, breathing slowly. At first, all I heard was my own heartbeat. Then the scratching started, very softly. It moved closer as if it was responding to me. I whispered, "Who's there?" My voice cracked. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard a raspy reply that sounded like it came from inside the concrete. It spoke words I couldn't understand, in that same harsh tone. I stumbled backward, nearly falling onto the bed. My teeth chattered, and I struggled to steady my breathing. I realized something was communicating, or at least trying to. That night I had an overwhelming sense of being watched. I felt it more strongly than before, like an unseen figure was standing inches from my face. I tried to watch a movie to distract myself, but every time I glanced at the wall, I saw movement in the corner of my eye. It looked like a flicker of black shifting across the symbols. My scalp tingled, and my stomach twisted in knots. I started to sweat. I decided that I had to do something drastic. Covering the symbols up might help, or it might make things worse. But leaving them exposed felt like an invitation. So the next day I bought more paint and a heavy-duty primer. I spent hours applying the primer, filling every line, every groove, and covering the carvings as best I could. I tried not to think about the possibility of angering whatever was in the walls. I just wanted to see if the atmosphere changed. As I rolled the primer on, I heard faint groaning sounds from inside the wall, like the concrete was protesting. My hands shook, but I forced myself to keep going. When I finished, the symbols were hidden again under a thick white coating. The place smelled strong, and my head pounded from the fumes and the tension. I put away my tools and collapsed on the couch. My heart was racing and my breathing felt shallow. I stayed awake until midnight, waiting to see if I heard any more noises. My mind was locked on the idea that this entity fed on people who disturbed the carvings. If that was true, I was already a target. The apartment stayed silent for a few hours, but I couldn't relax. Eventually, I dozed off, my body too exhausted to stay vigilant. I woke up at around 3 a.m. to the sound of a slow, methodical scraping. This time it was louder. I jumped up, chest tight, and listened. It felt like something was carving through my new layer of primer. My spine tingled and my eyes watered from panic. I grabbed my flashlight and ran to the living room wall. I saw faint cracks forming in the fresh paint, like something was scratching from the inside, trying to expose the symbols again. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I kept the flashlight beam on the wall, and I could actually see the paint beginning to flake. Then the sound stopped. Silence fell, but I felt the weight of something there. My entire body felt cold. Now I'm trapped in this cycle of dread. I know there's something in the walls and it doesn't want the symbols buried. I feel it when I step into the living room, and I feel it when I try to sleep. Every sound, every shadow, sets me off. I'm not sure what to do next. I hesitate to call any professional help because I can't prove anything. People would think I'm losing it. But I'm sure I heard voices, and I'm sure these symbols are part of something old. The more I try to hide them, the more active this presence becomes. I haven't left yet because breaking the lease would cost me money I don't have. But I'm questioning my sanity. I can't remember the last time I slept a full night. My hands shake every time I walk into the living room. I feel a crawling sensation on the back of my neck whenever I'm near the walls. I catch shadows out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and see nothing. Or maybe I see a faint outline that vanishes too fast for me to be sure. I don't know how this will end. All I know is that the walls won't stay quiet. If I try to paint over them again, I'm afraid the scratching might grow stronger. If I ignore them, the presence might stay close, waiting for me to slip up. I'm stuck in this apartment, and I feel like the symbols have tied themselves to me. The entity is here, watching me, whispering in that strange voice, waiting for something. I can sense it feeding off my fear, growing more real every time I flinch at a noise or see a shape in the corner of my eye. Every night, I brace myself for what comes next, and no matter how hard I try, I can't shake the feeling that once these symbols are disturbed, there is no going back. I'm sure now that this thing, whatever it is, doesn't plan on leaving me alone. I never expected my new place to shake me up so fast. On the night I moved in, I heard a strange noise coming from the basement. It was faint and uneven, like someone trying to hold back sobs. My mind told me it was just the pipes or the heating system, but something in that sound got under my skin. I spent the night trying to brush it off, but I felt this tightness in my chest, like my body knew something was off before my brain could sort it out. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, my thoughts drifted to that noise. The next morning, I walked downstairs and checked every corner of the basement. It smelled a bit moldy, like damp concrete and old cardboard. Sunlight barely reached those walls, so I switched on some overhead lights I had installed the day before. I ran my hand along the walls, looking for any sign of cracks or holes. I found nothing unusual. I saw my own footprints in the dust, but I also noticed an odd pattern of faint scuff marks near the far wall. They didn't match the shape of my shoes. I crouched down and touched them. They looked old. The basement was empty except for a few boxes I hadn't unpacked yet, so I stood there, feeling a slight chill, then headed back upstairs. That day, I distracted myself with grocery shopping and organizing the living room. I kept telling myself I was just on edge because of the move. I ordered some takeout for dinner and tried to relax. By the time it got dark, my shoulders were tense. My mind drifted back to the basement, but I forced myself to focus on a TV show. The noise from the night before stayed in the back of my head, though. It bugged me, like a riddle I couldn't solve. Later that night, I went down to check the basement again. The space was quiet, and the air felt still. I set up my desk in a corner and placed my chair in front of it. I tried to ignore the heavy feeling in the pit of my stomach. I plugged in my computer, adjusted my desk lamp, and decided I'd start using the basement as my office the next day. It seemed like a good plan, considering I had gotten a promotion and needed a quiet place to work. I climbed back upstairs and got ready for bed. Around midnight, I heard it again. It sounded like someone crying behind a wall, but the noise was even softer this time. My heart pounded. My ears started to ring. My breathing sped up. I got out of bed and went to the living room. I just stood there listening. The sound wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence in a way that made me sweat. I wiped my forehead and swallowed hard. I noticed my hands trembling. I told myself it was the house settling or old pipes, but it didn't feel right. It felt like a human sound. I decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and made my way downstairs. My steps felt heavier with each step. My pulse hammered in my ears. The basement was dark, and the overhead lights did little to soften the shadows. I walked around, trying to follow the noise. It seemed to come from somewhere near the far wall where I had noticed the scuff marks. I pressed my ear against that section of the wall. I could still hear it, this time more distinct, like quiet sobs. I knocked on the wall. The sound stopped for a second, then it resumed, but it sounded a bit closer. My skin crawled. I paced around the basement, pressing my ear to different spots. I noticed a slight draft near the lower part of that wall. I got down on my knees and felt along the trim, searching for any cold air. I noticed a small gap. When I pushed on the wall, a section clicked. My stomach clenched. I realized there was a hidden compartment or a false wall. I pushed again, and a small panel popped open. The smell that hit me was old and musty, like rotting wood. My mouth went dry. I shone the flashlight into the space, noticing a cramped storage area behind the wall. It looked like a hidden closet or something. The sobbing sound seemed to stop entirely. I crawled through the opening. The space was narrow, and I had to hunch to move around. My back brushed against the rough boards. I found a light switch on the side, an old one with a worn-out switch plate. I flipped it. A single bulb flickered overhead. The place was cramped but full of dusty objects, wooden boxes, metal bowls, some dark cloths, and small jars with dried-up contents. My heart was pounding. I didn't know what I was looking at, but it seemed like old ceremonial items. I saw markings I couldn't decipher. I touched a small wooden figurine that had strange symbols carved into it. It felt solid and heavy. I heard a quiet shuffle behind me. I whipped around, flashlight beam shaking. Nothing moved. My hands were sweaty on the handle. My throat felt tight. I tried to tell myself it was just my nerves. I took a few more steps and saw a thick book, bound with old leather, lying on a table. The pages were yellow and the writing looked like some foreign script I couldn't read. I flipped through a few pages, but the text and symbols made no sense to me. The diagram showed circles and shapes that might have been part of some ritual. As I stood there, I got this feeling that someone was in there with me. The hairs on my neck stood on end. I turned off the light and crawled out fast. I sealed the panel, pressed on it until it clicked back into place, and hurried upstairs. I felt like I couldn't get enough air in my lungs. My pulse was roaring in my head. I locked the basement door behind me and just stood in the kitchen for a while. My mind felt scattered. I tried to calm myself, but my hands kept shaking. The next morning I woke up late. My head ached and my neck felt stiff. I made coffee and avoided going downstairs. I told myself it was just some old storage area left behind by the previous owner. It didn't mean anything. Still, the crying noise stuck in my memory. I heard it clearly the night before. I spent the day trying to focus on my new job responsibilities. I had emails to send, calls to make, but I couldn't get my mind off that hidden compartment. The images of those strange items kept popping up in my head. My stomach felt knotted. By early evening, I decided I had to go back down. Leaving that place unexplored bothered me more than checking it. I needed to be in control of my own house. I took my phone, turned the flashlight on, and went into the basement. I was careful with each step. I pressed on the panel, and it opened again. The space smelled stale. Nothing had moved, but I felt that same sensation of being watched. My scalp tingled, and I could feel a bead of sweat running down my temple. I picked up one of the jars. The label was faded. The dried stuff inside looked like herbs or leaves. I moved it around a bit, feeling them rattle. Then I put it down and opened one of the wooden boxes. Inside, I found a handful of small stones with markings on them. My gut twisted, and I placed the lid back quickly. The items all seemed connected to some sort of ritual, but I had no idea what. My chest felt tight. As I turned to leave, I heard a soft sound again. It was like a short, muffled sob. The flashlight shook in my hand. My breath caught in my throat. I aimed the light around the space but saw no movement. My skin prickled with fear. The sound didn't repeat. I decided I had seen enough and crawled out. I closed the panel behind me and sat on the basement floor, panting. My nerves felt shot. That night the crying got louder. I was upstairs trying to fall asleep, and it started around midnight. The sobs were uneven. Sometimes they stopped, then started up again. It felt like they were right next to me, but I knew they came from below. My pulse thundered. I couldn't sleep. I got up, paced around the living room, and tried to find a logical explanation. My mind was racing. I kept imagining those old objects. My stomach churned. After a couple of hours, the sobbing changed. It sounded like moans, like someone pleading for help. I couldn't understand distinct words, but the tone was desperate. My mouth went dry, and I felt an uncomfortable tingling in my hands. I decided to call the landlord the next day. I told him about the noises. He said the place was old, and that maybe there was some piping issue or an animal trapped behind the walls. I asked if he knew anything about a hidden compartment. He said he wasn't aware of any secret spaces. His tone sounded casual, like he thought I was overreacting. I got off the phone, feeling frustrated and uneasy. When I went to the basement that afternoon, I tried to work in my new office space. I placed my laptop on the desk and opened a file I needed to review. My eyes kept drifting to the far wall. Every small creak in the house made me flinch. My shoulders felt tense. After about an hour, I heard a faint whisper, like someone exhaling near my ear. I jumped out of my chair and looked around. The basement was empty. My pulse was pounding, and I clenched my fists. My eyes darted around the concrete floor. My breathing grew uneven. I realized I couldn't focus on work down here with these noises. I went upstairs again, leaving the basement light on. In the kitchen, I slammed a cabinet door out of frustration. My mind felt cluttered with worry. I tried to watch some random show to distract myself, but my thoughts kept circling back to that voice I heard. I was sure it was closer than before. It sounded like a person pleading, but I couldn't make out the words, just the tone. That evening, right after sunset, I heard the cries again, this time echoing through the hallway. My hair stood on end. I grabbed my phone and pressed the recording app, trying to capture the sound. I stood near the basement door, waiting. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. Then I heard it. It was soft at first, then it rose to a painful, miserable wail. The hallway felt colder. My legs twitched. My breath came in short gasps. I tried to stand still and keep the phone steady. The sound reverberated, then died off in a broken sob. When I played the recording back, all I heard was a strange static. No crying, no moaning. My stomach sank. I pressed the phone to my ear, listened again, and still only heard faint noise. I felt dizzy. I replayed it multiple times, but there was nothing clear. My hands shook as I put the phone down. My mind started to race with questions. Was I hallucinating? Was the house messing with me? I rubbed my eyes and tried to steady my breathing. I went to bed, but the cries started again around midnight. They were sharper, more urgent. I pulled the covers over my head and squeezed my eyes shut. My heart kept hammering. I could feel sweat on my forehead. My stomach was in knots. I thought about leaving the house for the night, maybe booking a hotel, but I was too afraid to walk through the hallway, almost like I expected something to grab me. My imagination ran wild. The sobs continued and my walls felt like they were closing in. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Morning came, and I felt exhausted. My eyes were gritty from lack of sleep. I forced myself to eat something simple like toast even though I wasn't hungry. My nerves were raw. I stood at the top of the basement stairs for a while, listening. It was quiet. I went down. I turned on all the lights. The basement looked normal again, just the desk, the concrete, the boxes. But the feeling of being watched lingered. I walked to the secret panel and stared at it. My heart pounded. I felt like something was on the other side. I reached out, but my hand hovered over the panel, shaking. I lost my courage and pulled away. I went back to the desk and tried to focus on some simple tasks, but I could barely type a few lines before pausing to listen for noises. My mind felt scattered, like I couldn't concentrate. An hour later, I heard a small thud behind me. I spun around, but nothing was there. My body was tense, and I could feel my heart jump. I tasted bitterness in my mouth. like adrenaline surging. Then, out of nowhere, I felt a sudden pressure in my ears like a presence standing inches from me. I jerked my head to the side. I heard a soft voice, so close it made me stagger. It sounded like someone saying, "Help." It was just one word. I froze in place. My breathing came in rapid bursts. My vision blurred for a moment. I clenched my fists and forced myself to speak out loud. I said, "Who's there?" My voice sounded weak and shaky. There was no answer, just that same heavy silence. I grabbed my stuff and ran upstairs. My legs felt unsteady. I locked the basement door, then stood there, panting. My mind buzzed with fear. I couldn't think of any rational explanation for what just happened. I knew I heard a voice near my ear. My skin tingled all over. I realized I needed a break from this house. I stepped outside and sat in my car for a while. The cold air felt refreshing. My breathing slowed and I tried to calm down. I thought about calling a friend, but what would I say? That I'm hearing crying in my walls and discovered weird ceremonial stuff in a secret compartment? It sounded insane. I gripped the steering wheel, noticing my palms were sweating. After 10 minutes, I felt a little better. I decided to drive around the block and pick up some coffee just to clear my head. When I got back, it was late afternoon. I stood in the living room for a while, not wanting to hear any more sobs or pleas for help. The house seemed quiet. I forced myself to cook dinner and watch TV. By the time the clock hit 10, my stomach was in knots again. I dreaded the approach of midnight. I felt like I was stuck in a cycle of anxiety. My body felt tense, my nerves raw. I tried to stay awake, but my eyes felt heavy. I dozed off on the couch. I woke up to a moan echoing through the hallway. The clock read 12:04 a.m. The voice sounded pained, like someone was in distress. My heart pounded. I felt trapped. I dug my fingers into the couch cushion, trying to keep myself grounded in reality. Then the moan turned into a series of sobs. My skin turned cold. I shot up from the couch and turned on every light I could. The house lit up, but the cries continued. They sounded like they were moving, drifting from room to room. I didn't know what else to do. I stood there, heart racing, sweat trickling down my neck. The voice circled around me in waves, then died off. I looked at the time. It was only 12:30 a.m. My mind felt close to breaking. I wondered if I was losing it. I pressed my hands against my ears, but I still heard faint sobs. They felt like they were coming from right behind me. I stayed up the rest of the night, pacing around with the lights on. By dawn, I felt drained and jumpy, but the sobs had stopped. I realized I couldn't keep living like this. I needed help or needed to leave. But part of me felt drawn to that hidden space. I wanted to know what was in there that caused these noises. I wanted to figure out who or what was crying for help. My head throbbed, and my muscles felt stiff. The next day, I paced around the living room, trying to decide my next move. Every time I looked at the basement door, I got that heavy feeling in my gut. I heard a small creak in the floorboards. It made me jump. My heart was still racing. My sanity felt fragile. I knew that as long as I stayed here, I wouldn't have any peace, but I also couldn't ignore it. If I left now, I'd always wonder if the voice was real or if I was losing my mind. That's where I am right now, stuck in this house with those cries echoing in my head. I haven't gone back into the secret compartment since that last incident. I can still feel the presence behind me sometimes, like someone standing too close. I'm not sure if I can handle another night of sobbing and whispers. The tension crawls under my skin and makes every breath feel heavy. I've never felt this kind of constant dread before. I don't know what I'll do next, but I can't take much more of this. One thing is clear. The house isn't just old. Something else is in here, and it wants help. Now I need to figure out if I can give it or if I need to get out before I lose myself in the process. I never liked long drives on empty roads, but I did it anyway because I needed to see this place for myself. It was my distant uncle's house, and I had it all to myself now. I still don't know why he left it to me. He never called. He never wrote. I only knew he existed because of a few old family stories. But now I had his house. People told me it was somewhere in the countryside, far from neighbors, far from traffic, and surrounded by trees that blocked most of the sunlight in certain spots. I pulled up to the driveway late in the afternoon, got out of my car, and looked at the chipped paint on the front porch. The windows were closed and the curtains inside looked heavy. The front door squeaked when I walked in, and my shoes left marks on the dusty floorboards. I felt strange as soon as I set foot inside. The entrance hall smelled stale, like old books and stale air. The lights worked though, and I switched them on. A dull yellow glow spread across the hallway. I dropped my small suitcase and took a moment to get my bearings. I noticed a staircase to the second floor and a narrow corridor that led to the back of the house. The furniture in the living room looked worn out. There was a couch with faded upholstery, a wooden coffee table with water rings, and a tall bookshelf against the wall. I also noticed some strange symbols scratched into the banister, but I just shrugged it off at first. My plan was simple. I wanted to spend a few days here, see if there was anything valuable or interesting, and then decide what to do with the place. That changed when I started poking around the second floor. I climbed the stairs, coughing at the dust that rose with each step. At the top, there were 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. 2 bedrooms looked normal enough, just old mattresses, dressers, and a stale odor. The 3rd bedroom was locked. I figured the key would turn up eventually, so I moved on. Then I noticed another door at the end of the hallway. It was smaller and looked like it belonged to a closet, but when I approached, I realized it led to the attic. It had a heavy padlock on it. That was odd. Who puts a big padlock on an attic door? The next day, I searched the house for a key. I checked drawers, boxes, cabinets, and even under mattresses. I found a lot of dusty papers and some weird notes in my uncle's handwriting. The notes mentioned spirits, old rites, and phrases about something that needed to be sealed. I didn't fully understand them, but I felt unsettled. Late in the afternoon, I gave up looking for the key. I decided to force the attic door open. It took me 3 tries with a crowbar, but the lock finally snapped. The door creaked open and a gust of stale, cold air hit my face. The attic stairs were rickety. I climbed slowly, feeling each step bend under my weight. The air smelled of mildew and dust. When I reached the attic room, I saw old furniture covered in sheets. A dresser stood in one corner. A small bed frame leaned against the far wall. A few boxes with torn labels sat in the center, and a rug lay crumpled near them. Everything looked gray under a single light bulb. I walked around, trying to see if there was anything worth keeping. The dust made me sneeze. My eyes watered. I didn't see anything valuable, just junk. But then I noticed that the old rug wasn't just crumpled. It looked like it had been shoved aside. Something about the floorboards underneath caught my eye. I moved closer and realized there was a trap door set into the floor. The rug had been covering it, or maybe hiding it. I squatted down and ran my hand over the wooden frame. It had a simple latch, but the latch was locked. Luckily, it was rusted enough that I could pry it open without much effort. I gave it a hard pull. It took me a minute, and I banged my knuckles a couple of times, but I managed to swing it open. A stale odor drifted up from below. It smelled like dirt and damp stone. I grabbed the flashlight I'd brought with me, aimed it down, and saw a short wooden ladder leading into a small space. It wasn't big enough to be another room, but it looked bigger than a simple storage area. I lowered myself carefully, feeling the ladder wobble under my weight. When my feet touched the ground, I realized the walls here were made of stone. It felt colder, and the air was thick. I turned around and saw what looked like a makeshift altar. It was just a wooden table, rough and splintered, with some old bowls and candles on it. The candles had melted in strange patterns. I ran my hand over the surface of the table and felt grooves. They formed shapes I didn't recognize. I also saw a thin layer of dust on everything. Nobody had been down there in a while. The walls had a bunch of scribbles. They looked like notes and symbols. Some were in English, some in another language I didn't know. There were references to spirits of the earth and lines about appeasing them and binding them. My flashlight flickered, and my stomach felt tight. I didn't understand what any of this meant, but it gave me a bad feeling. My heart beat a little faster, and I felt sweat on the back of my neck. I had no idea my uncle was into anything like this. I stayed down there for maybe 10 minutes, checking for anything else. There was a small wooden box under the altar. It held a piece of cloth with more of those strange marks. It also had a bundle of dried herbs. They smelled sharp, like something I'd find in a spice cabinet, but stronger. I shut the box and backed away. The walls with those notes bothered me. I felt like I was standing in someone's private obsession. My hands shook a bit, and I just wanted to get out of that space. I climbed back up, closed the trap door, and dragged the rug over it. I told myself I wouldn't go back down there. It felt wrong. I told myself it was probably just some weird hobby of my uncle's, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. That night I tried to sleep in one of the second-floor bedrooms. The mattress was lumpy and the sheets were musty, but it beat sleeping on the couch downstairs. I heard the wind outside and a slow drip from the bathroom faucet. Around midnight I startled awake because I thought I heard footsteps above me. It sounded like slow steps crossing the attic floor. I lay there, heart pounding, waiting for them to stop. They did, but the silence that followed was worse. My mouth felt dry and I forced myself to take a few deep breaths. I convinced myself it was the old house settling, or maybe animals in the attic. The next morning I was tense but tried to focus on small tasks. I started tidying the living room, stacking books, cleaning the dust off the shelves. I kept glancing at the ceiling, feeling a tiny knot in my stomach whenever I remembered the trap door. Around lunch, I heated a can of soup on the old stove. The day dragged on without anything strange happening, so I relaxed a bit. That night, the footsteps started again. At first, I heard a faint creak, like someone testing a floorboard. Then a pause. Then another step. Then two more. My chest tightened, and I felt a cold sweat under my shirt. I sat up in bed, switched on the lamp, and listened. The steps didn't speed up or slow down. They seemed to move from one side of the attic to the other. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't have any evidence of an intruder, and I didn't see how anyone could be up there without breaking the newly forced lock or the attic door. I got up, grabbed the flashlight, and crept into the hallway. The attic door at the end was still shut. The padlock was destroyed, but the door was closed. I tried to build up my courage to open it again, but I felt nauseated. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I stood there for a few seconds, listening to those slow, deliberate steps. Then everything went quiet again. It was like whatever was up there knew I was outside the door, waiting. I shivered and went back to bed, though I didn't sleep well. The next day I got up with a stiff neck and a sense of dread. I stood in the kitchen, sipping coffee, telling myself I would check the attic during the day. Maybe there was some animal in the walls. That explanation made sense, but it didn't feel right. I couldn't push aside that tense feeling in my stomach. Around noon, I grabbed my flashlight and a wrench, walked up to the attic door, and opened it. The hinges squeaked, and the smell of dust and old wood hit me again. I climbed the steps, shining my flashlight around the room. I expected to see something moved or disturbed, but everything looked the same. The covered furniture, the boxes, and the rug hiding the trapdoor. I listened carefully but heard nothing. No skittering of animals, no dripping, nothing. I stepped forward, my heart pounding, and pulled the rug aside. The trapdoor was still closed. I gently lifted it, shining the flashlight into the space below. It looked just like before. Stone walls, the makeshift altar, scribbles on the walls. Nothing appeared out of place. I swallowed hard and climbed halfway down the ladder, just enough to look around. The space was silent except for the sound of my own breathing. I felt a chill and got back up. The moment I shut the trap door, I noticed some dust footprints on the attic floor near the rug. They didn't look like mine. My tracks led straight from the stairs to the rug, but there were smaller footprints that seemed to circle around. I couldn't explain them. They were faint, but they were there. I panicked. I felt my chest tighten, and I struggled to breathe. I stumbled back, nearly tripping on a stack of boxes. I dropped the flashlight, and the sound echoed. I picked it up, grabbed the rug, and threw it back over the trap door. Then I hurried down the attic stairs and pulled the door shut behind me. I stayed in the hallway, catching my breath, my hands shaking. I told myself I had to leave soon, but a part of me wanted to figure out what my uncle had been doing up there, and why. I also felt like something was urging me to go back down. That feeling made me shudder. I spent the rest of the day outside. The property had overgrown weeds and tall grass around it. I walked around trying to clear my head. The sun felt warm and I began to relax. But then my mind drifted back to those footprints. I felt uneasy again. When evening came, I refused to go to bed early. I sat in the living room with the TV on, flipping channels that barely came in. The reception was terrible. Around midnight, I heard the footsteps again. My skin prickled and I stood up, pacing around the living room. Part of me wanted to rush upstairs and catch whoever or whatever was there. Another part of me felt absolute terror at the idea. The footsteps stopped for a while, then started again around 1 a.m. They were louder this time. I couldn't ignore them. I grabbed the flashlight and hurried upstairs. When I reached the landing, the attic door stood wide open. I hadn't left it that way. My heart pounded and I felt sweat trickle down my forehead. I stepped closer, feeling the air turn cold. The stairs leading up were in full view. I swallowed hard and climbed, stepping slowly to avoid making too much noise. The attic was dark. The single light bulb was off, so I scanned the room with the flashlight. The furniture looked the same, but the rug was pulled back. The trap door was open. I forced myself to approach it. I aimed the beam of light down into that small space. The ladder was there. The altar was there. The walls still had those scribbles. But now one of the bowls on the altar was on the floor, tipped over. I heard a soft scraping sound, like something moving. I held my breath. My legs felt weak. I shone the light around, but I didn't see anything else. I considered climbing down, but my gut told me not to. Instead, I backed away. I heard a creak behind me. I spun around, flashlight shaking in my hand. I saw no one. But I felt pressure in the air, like something was standing there. My scalp tingled, and I backed toward the attic stairs. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't fill my lungs. I heard one more sound from below, a soft rustling. Then it all went silent. I stumbled downstairs, leaving the attic door open. I didn't care. I rushed into the bedroom, locked the door, and sat on the bed. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept imagining a shape coming through that door. The night dragged on, and I didn't sleep. I just sat there with my back against the wall, staring at the doorknob. In the morning, I walked downstairs, poured myself a glass of water, and realized I couldn't stay here anymore. My uncle's weird secrets or whatever was happening in that attic were too much. I packed up my suitcase in a rush. But as I grabbed my keys, I heard 3 slow creaks coming from the ceiling above me. My shoulders tensed. I looked up. The house was still. I thought about that hidden room, the altar, and those scribbles. It felt like an old ritual was half finished. I had the sense that it wanted me to pick it up where my uncle left off. My heart rate sped up, and I felt a painful thumping in my chest. I stood there for a moment, breathing fast and staring at the ceiling. I realized I couldn't handle it. I wasn't going back down there. I left that house as fast as I could. I didn't look back at the attic door, and I didn't care what might be waiting behind it. I just knew something was there, waiting for me to finish something I never started. When I reached my car, I threw my suitcase in the trunk and started the engine. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I pulled away. I still have the deed to that house, and maybe I'll try selling it someday. Maybe I'll just let it sit there with the door to the attic open and that trap door hidden under the rug. I don't know what my uncle was doing, and I don't want to find out. I just know that every time I close my eyes, I see those footprints in the dust. I hear those slow steps on the attic floor, and I feel that pull, like something wants me to come back. I won't. I can't. I'm done with it. But even as I say that, I feel my skin crawl, because it doesn't feel over. It feels like it's still waiting. And I hate that I can still feel its presence even when I'm miles away. I woke up with my heart hammering against my ribs. I couldn't see much at first because it was pitch black outside my tent. My watch said it was just after 2 a.m. I'd planned to sleep until dawn and start taking photos at sunrise. That was my whole purpose here. Get dramatic shots of these mountains and the caves tucked into the ridges. Everything was remote. Hardly anyone came out here. That was one of the reasons I chose this spot. But something felt wrong. My ears picked up faint screams echoing across the rocky slopes. They weren't close, but they weren't too far either. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could. The cold air hit my face. It was dry and carried a subtle smell of dust and pine needles. I listened. The screams came again, more like high-pitched howls than human voices, but still sounding human enough to send a chill down my neck. I got out of my sleeping bag and put on my boots and jacket. My hands trembled a bit. I wasn't sure if it was from the cold or from the surge of adrenaline. Outside my tent, the sky was clear. The moon was bright, but it was partially hidden behind the peaks, so most of the terrain was in shadow. My breath came out as a white puff. I looked around for a flashlight and grabbed the small one I'd packed. I also took my camera bag, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe it felt safer having something in my hands. I started walking toward the sound. The ground was uneven with loose stones and patches of dirt. Every step crunched. I stopped every few yards to listen. The screams seemed to bounce off the slopes, so it was tricky figuring out where they came from. They were loud, then faint, then loud again. I kept heading in what I thought was the right direction. After a few minutes, the sound changed. It wasn't just screaming. It had some echo of laughter. It was the kind of laughter that made my stomach clench. It wasn't joyful or even mocking. It was just strange and hollow. I found a narrow trail that twisted between large boulders. It led up a small incline. The path was rough, but I could manage it. The moonlight helped me see the silhouette of the mountains and the texture of the rocks. My own footsteps sounded too loud, and I kept glancing behind me. I felt like I wasn't alone. My eyes played tricks on me whenever I swept the flashlight around. Shadows looked like figures crouching near the rocks, but it was always just a trick of the light. Up ahead, I noticed a faint glow. It wasn't warm or flickering like a campfire. It was more of a weak, grayish light that didn't seem to come from a torch or any normal lantern. I moved closer, doing my best to stay quiet. The cold breeze picked up. It made the temperature drop so fast that my face and hands started to sting. I heard a low, deep moan, but it faded. Then the laughter came again, more distant this time. My mouth felt dry. The trail opened into a small clearing. I saw the entrance to a cave. The rocks around it looked jagged, and parts of it were wet with some kind of condensation. When I shined the flashlight on the cave entrance, I noticed something like a pale glimmer coming from deeper inside. I stood at the opening, listening. There were no more screams, but something inside felt alive in a bad way. My skin crawled. I had a strong urge to turn around and go back to my tent, but I also felt drawn in by curiosity, or maybe a sense of duty to figure out what was happening. I took a few steps in. The air inside the cave was cold, even colder than outside. I smelled something stale, like old wet stone and moss. Tiny drops of water dripped from the ceiling, making a soft tapping on the rock floor. I used my flashlight to see the walls. They were covered with primitive drawings in faded red, brown, and black colors. The lines showed human-like figures standing near animals I couldn't identify right away. Some looked like deer or elk, but they had odd shapes. The figures were tall and thin, with arms raised or extended toward the animals. In a few sections, it looked like the figures were chasing the animals, or the animals were circling them. I ran my fingers over one of the drawings. The paint felt like it was part of the rock, worn down by centuries of damp air. My mind raced with thoughts about how old these could be. I tried to look for any sign of more recent activity, like footprints or trash, but there wasn't anything obvious. Everything was covered in dust. My own footprints were the only ones I saw, and they stood out in the thin layer of dirt on the floor. The cold draft of air suddenly grew stronger, brushing against the back of my neck. It felt like a hand touching me, and I jerked away. I spun around with the flashlight. I didn't see anything, but my heart pounded. I realized I was breathing too fast, so I tried to calm myself. My palms were sweaty. I set my camera bag down on a flat rock near the wall so I could hold the flashlight more steadily. I looked deeper into the cave. The passage sloped downward. The grayish glow I'd seen outside was coming from somewhere below. It flickered now and then like a dim light that couldn't make up its mind. I thought about turning back, but then I heard my name. It wasn't a shout or even a whisper, but it was somewhere in between. The voice was low and hoarse. It stretched out the last syllable of my name like it was testing how it felt on the tongue. My knees went weak. I wasn't imagining it. I heard it clearly. It came from deeper inside the cave. I felt a surge of cold sweat down my spine. Adrenaline shot through my veins, and I took a step back. But instead of fleeing, I moved forward. I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was shock. As I descended the slope, each step caused small rocks to roll under my boots. The floor was uneven and damp. The flashlight beam showed more drawings, more of those humanoid shapes. Some had strange marks around their heads, almost like they wore headdresses made from animal skulls. I tried to ignore them. The glow got brighter, but it still had that dull gray tone. It didn't look natural. It seemed to come from a section of the cave where the ceiling was higher. I stepped into a wider chamber. The ceiling arched about 10 feet above me. Large stalactites hung down, catching the flashlight's beam with shiny droplets of water. I saw smaller passages leading off in different directions, but the main focus was a large, flat rock in the center. It looked like an altar, but I didn't want to jump to any conclusions. On the walls there were more drawings. Some depicted figures dancing or writhing around a central shape. I got closer to look. My chest felt tight. It looked like they were dancing around a figure with large eyes, but the paint was so faded it was hard to see details. The rest of the chamber was silent, except for the dripping water. My name echoed again, sounding like it came from all directions at once. I spun around, shining the flashlight everywhere. My hands shook so badly that the beam danced on the walls. My name came again, drawn out in a mocking tone. It was followed by soft laughter. That laughter made the hair on my arms stand up. It seemed to come from near the ceiling. I pointed the flashlight upward, but I saw nothing, just the rough rock and the shadows of stalactites. Then I felt a blast of cold wind from one of the smaller tunnels. It almost knocked me off balance. Something glinted in the darkness. 2 tiny points of light like eyes reflecting the flashlight. They vanished as soon as I pointed the beam at them. I heard scraping sounds like nails on stone. My stomach twisted in knots. I called out, "Who's there?" My voice echoed. I realized how alone I was, deep in the cave without any cell signal or any chance of help. The laughter came again, but this time it ended in a series of deep, raspy breaths. I took a few steps backward, heading for the slope I came down. The cave seemed darker behind me, as though the walls were closing in. My breathing grew ragged. I forced myself to look over my shoulder, but I didn't see a clear path. I felt disoriented. My flashlight beam showed the jagged floor, the tall walls, and the different passages. I had a moment of panic where I couldn't tell which way led out. Then I saw the faint outline of the slope. I recognized a few of the drawings on the walls. I hurried in that direction, my boots scraping on the loose rocks. My chest burned from the cold air. Something scurried across the floor behind me, but I refused to look back. I heard it again. My name, followed by that laughter. It was closer now, so close I could almost feel warm breath on my neck. But the air was freezing, so it didn't make sense. I just kept moving. I made it back to the narrow corridor. I saw my footprints in the dust. Following them, I reached the area where I'd left my camera bag. I scooped it up without stopping. My mouth was so dry I could barely swallow. I kept hearing that laughter. Then the voice said something else. It was deep and unintelligible, like words in a language I didn't know. I shoved my camera bag over my shoulder and sprinted for the exit. My flashlight shook in my hand. The beam bounced across the walls, revealing quick flashes of those eerie drawings. When I emerged from the cave, I gasped for the outside air. It wasn't exactly warm, but it felt better than the suffocating chill inside. The moon was still out, but it was lower in the sky. I could see the faint outline of the mountains against the dark blue horizon. I turned off the flashlight, trying to preserve my night vision. I heard that voice again echoing from the cave entrance. My name, elongated and distorted, followed by a growl that turned into laughter. It made me shiver, like something was mocking me. But I wasn't about to go back in there. I hurried along the narrow trail, stumbling over loose rocks. My pulse pounded in my ears. Every few steps I whipped my head around, expecting to see someone or something chasing me. But all I saw were the silent boulders and the uneven shapes of the mountains. My own breathing was the loudest sound. The screams from earlier were gone. Now it was just the wind and my heartbeat. I reached my campsite after what felt like an eternity. My tent was exactly where I left it, but it looked smaller and more vulnerable than before. I didn't waste time. I yanked out the tent stakes, shoved everything into my backpack, and took down the tent. My hands fumbled with the poles. Every slight sound, every crunch of dirt, made me flinch. It felt like invisible eyes were on me from all sides. The back of my neck tingled, and I kept seeing that pair of glowing eyes in my mind. I wanted to leave immediately, but I had to be careful about going down the mountainside in the dark. Still, I figured I'd rather risk twisting an ankle than stick around. Once I had everything packed, I slung my gear over my shoulders. My camera bag dug into my side, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. As I started down the path, the voice called out again from somewhere behind me. It was faint but still clear, telling me it would follow me wherever I went in this forest. The tone was full of a cold amusement. My legs felt heavy, but I pushed forward. I tried not to listen. Every so often I caught the echo of that mocking laughter. I resisted the urge to look back. My main focus was the trail and placing my feet carefully so I didn't slip. Loose gravel skittered under my boots. I kept going until the landscape dipped into a valley. The slope was steep and I had to brace myself against a few trees to keep from falling. I twisted my ankle a little, enough to make me grit my teeth, but not enough to stop me. The adrenaline drowned out most of the pain. I just wanted to put distance between me and that cave. When I finally reached a flatter area, the first hints of morning light were touching the sky. It wasn't a sunrise yet, just a soft, cold glow that made the horizon a bit lighter. I stopped to catch my breath and gulp some water from my canteen. My muscles ached. My mouth tasted like metal. I tried to calm down by focusing on simple things. The feel of the water against my throat, the rough straps of my backpack. My mind buzzed with the memory of that voice calling my name. I glanced over my shoulder. I still felt like I was being watched, but I didn't see anything out of place. I kept going. Even with some light in the sky, the forest was quiet. Sometimes I heard a rustle of leaves, probably small animals. But every little noise made me jump. My neck felt tense, as though expecting a cold grip at any moment. I thought about what I saw in the cave, the drawings, the strange glow in those eyes. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the trail. My feet dragged a bit, but I forced them to keep moving. Every so often I thought I heard a faint laugh behind me. I refused to stop. Eventually I reached a dirt road that led down toward a more accessible area. My plan was to find my car, which was parked a few miles away on a rugged access road. From there, I'd drive out of this entire region as soon as I could. I walked fast, ignoring the pain in my ankle. The first real colors of dawn appeared. I could finally see details of the trees and shrubs around me. Everything looked ordinary in the daylight, but I still felt that presence. It clung to my nerves, making my skin prickle. As the sun rose, the temperature started to climb a bit, but I didn't feel any relief. My mind was stuck on the memory of those glowing eyes and that voice. I wondered if I'd just had some hallucination brought on by exhaustion and fear. But I knew what I heard. It was too clear, too specific. I pressed forward, wiping sweat from my forehead. My breath came in uneven gasps. It took me nearly 2 hours to reach my car. The forest started to thin out near the parking area. My car was the only one there, coated in a layer of dust from the drive up. I looked around one last time before I got in. The silence weighed on me. There was no sign of anyone else. The mountains rose behind me, looking peaceful in the morning light. I opened the trunk, threw my gear inside, and slammed it shut. I felt the urge to look over my shoulder again. I did, and for a moment I thought I saw a dark figure among the trees. I blinked and it was gone. I got in the driver's seat and started the engine. My hands still trembled on the steering wheel. I turned on the heat to take off the morning chill. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't breathe properly. I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a face behind me. Nothing. I pulled out of the makeshift lot and started the slow drive down the uneven dirt road. My tires kicked up dust and gravel. The car bumped over ruts. The tension in my shoulders never faded. Even as I reached the main road, I felt that presence. I tried to focus on driving, on staying alert for potholes. My ankle throbbed in time with my heartbeat. The memory of the cave wouldn't leave my mind. I could still hear that voice whispering my name, promising to follow me through the forest. I tightened my grip on the wheel. I had no intention of stopping until I was far from these mountains. I just wanted to get out, to feel asphalt under the tires, to see road signs, power lines, any sign of normal life. That's it. That's the entire reason I left. I didn't take a single photograph worth keeping. I tore my campsite down in a panic, and all I have are a few shots of rock formations from earlier that day. But there's no way I'm ever going back. I don't care if people say it's just old folklore, or if someone thinks I'm exaggerating. I know what I heard, what I saw, and what I felt. And I'm not sticking around to find out what those eyes wanted or what that laughter meant. All I care about now is putting enough miles between me and that cave so I can maybe sleep tonight without hearing that deep voice calling my name. I arrived at the chalet on a gray afternoon, hoping for peace and isolation. I had pictured myself in a warm living room, sipping coffee and listening to the wind against the walls. I never expected to feel trapped. I never imagined I'd be afraid to fall asleep under that roof. Now I'm counting the hours to get out of here, and I keep looking over my shoulder every time I step outside. The drive up the mountain felt long and tiring, but I enjoyed the scenery. The road was narrow and tall pines stood on both sides. The sky was dull. Sometimes I saw patches of ice on the asphalt, but I kept a moderate speed. I had no reason to hurry. I reached the chalet right after the sun went behind a thick layer of clouds. The snow on the driveway looked fresh. I parked my car near the porch and started unloading my bags. The chalet had dark wooden walls. The roof was steep, and layers of snow hung over the edges. I liked the shape of the place at first glance. The porch was small, with a couple of metal chairs and a table. I carried my suitcase to the front door. It creaked when I turned the key. Inside, the first thing I noticed was an old smell, something like dried wood and stale air. I tried the light switch on the wall. A weak bulb came to life above me, flickering a bit before staying on. I closed the door behind me and looked around. The living room had a couch, a coffee table, and a television on a simple stand. The walls had a rough texture like untreated logs. There was a fireplace in one corner, with a set of iron tools leaning against the brick. A narrow hallway led to the small kitchen on the right and a single bedroom at the end. It felt cozy enough, but there was a strange detail that stuck out. Every window had heavy bars inside, secured with padlocks and chains. I also spotted crucifixes on each corner of the living room ceiling. There was even one over the door. I tried to see if they were old, but they looked polished, like someone dusted them often. I set my suitcase on the couch and walked to the windows. I tugged on the bars and they didn't budge. The chains rattled a bit and the locks looked solid. I rubbed my hand over the cold metal. I felt my shoulders tense up. It wasn't the sort of thing I'd expect in a holiday chalet. My mind jumped to possible reasons. Maybe the owner wanted to keep bears out, or maybe there had been burglaries in the past. Still, the crucifixes everywhere made me uneasy. It felt like whoever owned this place was protecting themselves from something bigger than a wild animal. I tried to shrug it off. I told myself it was just a personal quirk of the owner. I went into the bedroom to check it out. It was small, with a single bed against the far wall, a nightstand, and a dusty lamp. There was one window there too, also with bars. The walls had a few hooks, probably for hanging coats. I noticed another crucifix near the ceiling on the left side. I set my bag down and decided to take a quick walk outside before it got too dark. The porch steps creaked under my boots. The sky was turning darker with a pale outline of sun just behind the clouds. The forest around the chalet looked dense. The tall pines and snowdrifts gave me a sense of calm at first. I breathed in the cold air, felt it sting my lungs. My boots sank into the snow as I walked a short distance around the house. I found no signs of other cabins nearby. The only footprints were my own. The place felt deserted. The wind made the branches sway, and I heard distant groaning from the trees rubbing together. I spent about 10 minutes circling the property, then went back inside to light the fireplace. Later, I made some instant noodles in the kitchen and ate while leaning against the counter. The quiet was almost too much. The hum of the refrigerator and the occasional popping of the fire in the living room were the only sounds. I tried turning on the TV, but it only showed static. I switched it off and sighed. I felt a bit lonely, but that was why I came, to get away from everyone and everything. I wanted time to reset my head. The strangeness of the bars and crucifixes lingered in my mind, but I tried not to focus on it. That night I got ready for bed around 11. The wind had picked up outside. Gusts whistled against the roof. The bedroom felt colder than the rest of the chalet, so I kept my sweater on over my thermal shirt. The bed creaked when I lay down. I turned off the lamp on the nightstand and tried to clear my head. I listened to the wind for a while, then closed my eyes. I was drifting off when I heard something. At first I thought it was the wind again, but I realized it sounded more like faint whispers. I held my breath to listen. The whispers came in short bursts, like multiple people talking over each other. I couldn't make out words, just a hushed chatter. It felt close, maybe coming from the hallway. My heart rate sped up. I sat up in bed and strained my ears. The whispers kept going. Then I heard my name. It was soft, like a breath. I jolted upright and flicked on the lamp. The whispers stopped immediately. Silence filled the room. I waited, my pulse thumping in my ears. After a minute, I got up and went to the door. I opened it and peeked into the living room. Everything was dark, the fireplace ashes cold. Nothing moved. I shut the door and locked it, feeling a jolt of anxiety as I did so. I went back to bed, leaving the lamp on this time. I barely slept. My body felt tense, like I was expecting something to grab me at any second. The few moments when I did drift off, I'd snap awake at the slightest noise. Around 5 in the morning, I got up and put on some boots. I planned to go outside for fresh air. Maybe a quick walk would clear my head. When I opened the front door, I saw footprints in the snow around the porch. The prints looked like normal boot prints, but they circled the chalet in a random pattern, zigzagging near the walls. They didn't come from any visible path. They started at the corner of the chalet and ended somewhere near the back. But then they vanished. It didn't look like they faded. They just stopped, as if whoever made them disappeared into thin air. My stomach churned. I felt cold sweat on my forehead. I followed the trail for a few yards, but it just ended abruptly. The rest of the snow was untouched. I went back inside and locked the door. I checked all the windows, making sure the locks were still intact. Nothing looked tampered with. I stared at those bars and chains. I thought about the whispers and the footprints. My hands shook a bit. I tried to calm down by making coffee. I forced myself to think rationally. Maybe it was just a local, or maybe I'd made those footprints myself somehow. But my boots were different in size from what I saw outside. Also, there were more steps than I'd taken. I felt a heaviness in my chest. That day I tried to keep busy. I stacked some firewood from a small shed on the side of the chalet. The shed was locked, and I found a key for it on the kitchen counter. Inside, I found a neat pile of logs and a small axe. Everything smelled like damp wood. I hauled a few logs inside for the night. I kept glancing around the property, looking for movement between the trees or signs of someone watching. I saw nothing. The sun was out a bit, giving a softer light over the snowy ground. The temperature felt slightly warmer, but I still kept my coat zipped up. I tried to use my phone to call a friend, but the signal was weak. I managed to send a text message to let him know I got to the chalet, but I didn't mention anything weird. I didn't want to seem paranoid. By noon, I felt cooped up again, so I decided to walk deeper into the woods. Maybe I'd find a better signal, or at least distract myself. The snow crunched under my boots. The trees stood still, and occasionally I'd hear a bird flapping overhead. After about half a mile, I turned around. The wind picked up again, and I didn't want to get lost. On my way back, I couldn't stop thinking about the footprints I'd seen earlier. I tried to look for any new tracks, but the only ones I spotted were my own. When I returned, I walked around the outside of the chalet again. I found a few fresh prints near the back. Same shape as the ones before, same abrupt ending. There was no path leading out, just footprints around the wall and then nothing. I felt my heart hammering in my chest. I marched back inside and slammed the door. I looked at my reflection in the small mirror by the entrance. I saw sweat on my temples and my eyes looked bloodshot. I spent the rest of the afternoon pacing the living room. I turned on the TV again, got static, and shut it off. I tried the radio on a small stereo in the kitchen. It only picked up a faint local station that played old country songs with heavy static. The songs cut in and out, so I eventually turned that off too. I made a sandwich and forced myself to eat. I drank water straight from the tap, which was icy cold. The pipes rattled a bit whenever I turned the faucet. As evening came, the sky turned that dull gray again. I heard the wind swirl around the chalet. I lit the fireplace early, using plenty of wood. The flames crackled, but I didn't feel calm. I looked at the crucifixes on the walls, at the bars on the windows, at the locks and chains. I wondered if they were there to keep something out, or to keep something in. That thought ran laps in my head, and I couldn't shake it. That night, the whispers started again, as soon as I shut off the main lights. I sat by the fireplace, trying to relax. The only light came from the fire. I heard a soft, hushed voice near my ear. My body tensed and I jerked around. Nobody was there. Then I heard what sounded like multiple voices, all layered over each other, coming from different corners of the living room. They spoke in a low, uneven tone. My name came up again. I heard it clearly this time, whispered in a male voice. My heart pounded. I stood up, grabbed the fireplace poker, and stepped backward until I felt the wall behind me. The voices continued for several minutes. I could feel my hands shaking on the poker handle. The hair on my arm stood up. My breath came in short bursts. Then the voices faded, like a volume dial being turned down. The fire still crackled in front of me, casting shadows on the floor. I felt adrenaline pumping and I tried to slow my breathing. I walked to the bedroom, still gripping the poker, and locked the door. I wedged a chair under the handle and left the lamp on. I knew sleep would be impossible, but I had to lie down. At some point I must have dozed off because I remember waking up to a faint knock on the bedroom window. My eyes shot open. It was still dark. I looked at the window. Through the bars, I saw nothing. But I heard it again. A tap, like someone flicking the glass with a finger. I sat up, my heart hammering again. The tapping continued, then stopped. I got out of bed, holding the poker close. I approached the window, trying to see beyond the bars. Just darkness. The wind howled outside. The glass looked clear, no cracks, no handprints. I stood there for a long time, waiting. Eventually, I moved back to the bed, but I didn't lie down. I just sat there, staring at the window. I must have dozed off again because morning light woke me. It was pale, creeping through the bars. I stood up stiffly and checked the chalet. Nothing had changed inside, but outside I saw more footprints. They circled every wall. Some of them looped around in odd patterns, as though someone had wandered aimlessly, stopping at each window. A shiver ran through me. I didn't want to stick around any longer. I felt exhausted, worn out, and jumpy. My cheeks felt raw from the cold and lack of proper sleep. I decided to gather my stuff. I had rented the place for a few days, but I couldn't stand another night like that. I tossed everything into my suitcase, not bothering to fold my clothes. I kicked the front door open and hauled my bag outside. The cold air slapped me in the face, but I almost felt relief being out of that place. I loaded the car in a rush, double-checking that I had my wallet and keys. Before I started the engine, I glanced back at the chalet. The crucifixes were still in place, and the bars on the windows caught the morning light. I stood there for a moment, breathing heavily. I thought about the whispers. I thought about those footprints that seemed to come from nowhere. I suddenly felt like something was watching me from inside. I got into my car and slammed the door. My hands trembled as I turned the key. The engine sputtered to life and the heater kicked in with a low hum. I backed out of the driveway, my tires crunching over the fresh snow. I checked the rearview mirror. I saw the chalet shrink behind me. I noticed a slight movement near the porch, like a shadow crossing the front window, but I refused to stop or look closely. I pressed the gas pedal, my pulse still racing. The road ahead curved around the mountain, and I focused on keeping my car steady on the icy surface. I didn't care about the scenery anymore. I just wanted to get down to the main road away from that place. As I left, I couldn't hear whispers, but I felt a weird pressure in my ears, like the silence was heavier than normal. My throat felt tight. I gripped the steering wheel harder than necessary. My shoulders ached from tension. I drove until I reached the first sign of civilization, a small gas station. I pulled in, parked, and just sat there for a minute, letting the engine idle. My mind was a mess, but I felt safer. The bright lights of the station made me blink. I realized how drained I was. My face felt numb and my hands tingled. I don't know what exactly was in that chalet. All I know is it wanted my attention. It circled me in the snow, whispered my name, and tapped on windows. It watched me without ever revealing itself. And I'm glad I left before it tried something more direct. I plan on leaving that part of the mountain alone from now on. I drove away with my heart thumping, and I haven't stopped looking over my shoulder since. I still remember the moment I saw that mirror at the flea market. I was wandering between rows of old books, rusted tools, and chipped porcelain figures when it caught my eye. It was tucked away under a pile of mismatched jewelry boxes. The metal casing looked tarnished and the small latch was loose. Something about it made me stop. I felt a pull, like I needed to pick it up. I reached out and grabbed it before I even realized what I was doing. The vendor was a thin man with a wrinkled face. He nodded when I showed interest. He barely spoke. He just said the price. I paid him. I stuffed the mirror into my pocket and walked away. I felt an odd tightness in my chest. It wasn't like excitement. It was more like a sudden tension, but I ignored it. I assumed I was just tired. When I got home that afternoon, I tossed the mirror onto the coffee table and forgot about it for the rest of the day. My place is a small apartment on the third floor of a building with a noisy elevator. My living room has a sagging couch, a cheap TV stand, and peeling wallpaper in the corner. Everything feels cramped. I remember flopping onto the couch, exhausted from the long day. I didn't think about the mirror until late that night. I was getting ready for bed. I saw it sitting there on the coffee table under the dim light from the standing lamp. Something about it felt strange. I could have put it in a drawer, but I left it out. I went to brush my teeth, then came back and sat on the couch again. I picked it up and flipped it open. The glass was dull, maybe a little scratched. At first, I saw my reflection. My hair looked a bit messy, my eyes had dark circles. Then I noticed a faint flicker behind me. I turned around fast, but nothing was there. I shook my head. I figured the mirror was too dusty or warped. I wiped it with my shirt and tried again. This time, it just reflected my face. I closed it and went to bed. The next day I was busy. I had errands and some work to catch up on. I didn't pay much attention to the mirror until night. I ate a quick dinner, sank into the couch, and decided to open the mirror again. I don't know why I felt drawn to it. I just did. As I flipped the latch, I felt a slight chill on the back of my neck. The reflection showed me sitting there, but something else seemed off. It looked like a shadow behind me, but not shaped like any object in my living room. It was more like a smear, an outline, but I couldn't pinpoint it. I turned around, but saw nothing. When I looked back at the mirror, the smear was gone. I felt my heart pound a little. It wasn't fear exactly, but my body felt tense. I closed the mirror, set it aside, and decided to watch TV. I kept glancing at it, though. I wanted to see if the smear would show up again, but I was too uneasy to open it right then. Over the next few days, I found myself checking that mirror more often. Each time, I noticed something new. The reflection of my face looked normal, but behind me, I'd see a faint shape like a dark patch. It stayed in the same spot, but seemed to get more defined each time I looked. I started feeling anxious. My chest would tighten, and my palms would sweat whenever I held the mirror. My breathing would speed up. I told myself it was just a trick of the old glass, some optical quirk. But I couldn't ignore how it seemed to move. One day I tilted my head to the side, and the shadow's outline shifted in the mirror, as if it were mirroring my movement but lagging a second behind. It gave me chills. I tried to push it out of my mind. I left the mirror in my bedroom drawer for a while. But then, one evening, I caught a glimpse of something in the window of my living room. It was dark outside, and the interior lights were on, so the window reflected me pretty clearly. At first I saw my face and my shoulders. Then I noticed that same smudge-like shape behind me. It was the same height, the same vaguely human outline. I whipped around, expecting to see a person standing in my apartment. There was nobody there. My heart pounded. I felt sweat trickle down my forehead. I turned back to the window, and the shape was gone. I stood there breathing hard for what felt like a full minute. Then I rushed to my bedroom, pulled the mirror from the drawer, and opened it. The shape was there, right behind me in the reflection. This time, it had a hint of something like eyes, two darker spots in the shadow. They looked cold, like they were staring right at me. I slammed the mirror shut. My hands were shaking. I called a friend to try and distract myself. I didn't mention the mirror. I just told him I was stressed out. He invited me out for a drink, but I said no. I wasn't sure why. I think I was embarrassed, or maybe I was afraid to leave the apartment. I ended up pacing around my living room, checking every corner and every closet, even though I knew I was alone. I went to bed late that night and I barely slept. The next morning, I tried to push aside my fear. I got ready for work, ate a quick breakfast, and left the apartment. I felt a little better outside with the sun shining. The city noise distracted me. By the time I got to my office building, I had almost convinced myself that I'd imagined the whole thing. But in the lobby, I passed a wall of polished metal panels. I saw my reflection in them. At first it was just me, but then, as I walked, I saw that shape appear on the panel behind me. I froze. My skin prickled. My heart hammered. I stood there staring at my reflection until someone behind me asked if I was okay. I pretended I was fine and hurried to the elevator. I felt like I was losing my mind. All day at work, I felt jumpy. I avoided looking at any reflective surfaces. I even avoided the bathroom mirror for most of the day. When I finally had to use the restroom, I tried not to look into the mirror at all. I washed my hands and stared at the sink. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw a dark figure in the reflection. It was so faint, but it was there. I left the bathroom quickly. On my way home, I stopped at a hardware store. I had this plan to seal the mirror away somehow. I bought a roll of duct tape in a small locked box. When I got to my apartment, I wrapped the mirror in a towel, sealed it with duct tape, and stuck it in the box. I locked the box and shoved it under my bed. I told myself that if it was out of sight, I'd stop thinking about it. For a while, it worked. I didn't see the shape in windows or shiny surfaces that night. I felt relieved. I ate dinner, watched TV, and slept better than I had in days. But the next afternoon I saw it in a puddle on the sidewalk. The rain had stopped and I was stepping around a large puddle near the curb. I glanced down. I saw my reflection, and then the shape behind me, more distinct than ever. It had a clear silhouette, like a dark figure with shoulders and a vague head shape. I felt my entire body tense. My heart skipped. My breath got shallow. I stumbled back, almost falling. People around me asked if I was okay, but I just mumbled something and hurried off. I realized then that locking the mirror away didn't solve anything. I couldn't escape whatever this thing was. That night, I started hearing whispers. I would be sitting in my apartment with the TV on, and I'd hear a soft voice behind me. It didn't sound like my neighbor's. It was too close, like it was right next to me. I'd spin around, but there was nobody there. The voice was low, almost like a raspy breath. It kept saying strange syllables that I couldn't understand. My arms would break out in goosebumps every time I heard it. I considered tossing the mirror altogether, but I felt this strange pull. I wanted to open it again, like an urge I couldn't shake. I tried to fight it, but the pressure built. My mind kept going back to it. Eventually, late at night, I dragged the box out from under my bed. I unlocked it and unwrapped the mirror. My hands were shaking again. I forced myself to open the mirror. The reflection showed my face, pale and sweaty. Behind me, the shadow figure took up almost half the mirror. It looked like a human outline, but completely black except for two cold, dark spots where the eyes should be. I felt a shiver run down my spine. My eyes locked on it. It was like I was in a trance. My mouth went dry and my heart pounded in my ears. I couldn't look away. Suddenly, the figure in the mirror moved its hand. At least it looked like a hand shape. It reached forward, like it was touching the inside of the mirror's glass. My stomach twisted. I slammed the mirror shut so hard that the latch cracked. Then I threw it across the room. It clattered against the floor. I grabbed my head in my hands, breathing fast. My mind raced. I felt dizzy, almost nauseous. I left it there, lying on the floor. I paced around the room, trying to calm down. I could still feel its presence, like it was there in the shadows. Every time I looked at a dark corner, I imagined I could see that shape. My ears played tricks on me. I thought I heard faint footsteps behind me or the rustling of fabric. But every time I checked, there was nothing. I barely slept that night. The next day, I tried to focus on my usual routine. I cleaned my apartment, did laundry, and tried to ignore that mirror. But every time I caught a glimpse of myself in a reflective surface, like the metal door handle or the blank TV screen, I'd see a flicker of that shape. It was like a stain on my vision. By late afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to try something drastic. I took the mirror into the building's basement. There's a small utility room near the storage lockers. It's dark, damp, and has a musty smell. I set the mirror on a dusty table there. My plan was to smash it or damage it somehow, but as soon as I lifted a hammer, I felt that strange pull again. My breath caught in my throat. I hesitated. I wondered what would happen if I broke it. Would that free this thing? Would it make everything worse? I stood there, hammer in hand, breathing hard. The overhead light flickered. I felt a wave of cold air brush past me. It was enough to make me grip the hammer tighter. I stared at the mirror. It lay open, showing my reflection. The figure wasn't as visible in that poor light, but I saw the outline. My arm tensed, ready to strike. But the shape in the mirror seemed to shift, like it was waiting. I heard those whispers again. They felt louder in that closed space. My heart thudded against my ribs. Sweat dripped down my forehead. I lowered the hammer. I couldn't bring myself to break it. Instead, I snapped the mirror shut and slammed it onto the table. I wrapped it in the towel again, then sealed it with tape. I put it back into the locked box. I left the box in that basement room, hidden behind some broken furniture. I figured if I kept it down there, maybe I wouldn't see it in reflections anymore. Maybe the shape would stay locked away. I went back to my apartment, shaking. I tried to calm myself by cleaning up, taking a long shower, and watching something light on TV. But that night, as I got into bed, I saw a dark shape in the corner of my bedroom. It was just for a second, like a shadow cast by something outside. Then it vanished. My heart skipped. I lay there, staring at that corner until my eyes burned. Eventually, I drifted off to a restless sleep. The next few days were rough. I thought I heard footsteps in the hallway behind me every time I headed to the elevator. I avoided every reflective surface, but it's impossible to avoid them all. Windows, chrome fixtures, puddles, even the black screen of my phone when it's turned off. I saw flashes of that shape. Sometimes it was faint. Sometimes it felt almost solid. I felt it watching me. My chest would tighten. My mouth would go dry. My legs would feel weak. I'd get this sudden rush of adrenaline like I wanted to run but had nowhere to go. I started sleeping with the lights on. I tried playing music to drown out the whispers, but sometimes, late at night, I thought I still heard them. They were like faint, rasping words that made no sense. My arms would break out in goosebumps. I'd toss and turn in bed, sweating. Each morning I felt more and more tired. I tried going to a friend's house for a bit, hoping the presence wouldn't follow me. But it did. I caught sight of the figure in my friend's bathroom mirror. I left early, making up some excuse. Now I'm at the point where I'm trying to figure out my next move. The shape is still there, appearing in random reflections wherever I go. It doesn't speak in full words, just those eerie sounds. But I feel its intent. It wants to come closer. It wants to break free of the mirror. I can sense it whenever I see those dark patches behind me. My spine tingles and my breath hitches. My mind races trying to think of a way out, but I have no clue. I haven't been back to that basement in a while. The mirror is still locked in that box. Part of me wants to retrieve it, face it, and end this once and for all. Part of me is terrified that if I open it again, that thing will escape completely. I can't explain why I believe that. It's just a feeling in my gut. A strong, gnawing sense that if I open it again, I'll see it clearly. I'll see its face. And maybe it'll step out of the mirror's surface and into my life for good. My hands shake just thinking about it. So that's where I am now. I can't destroy it, and I can't set it free. I feel trapped in a loop of fear. Every day I watch my own reflection, half expecting to see the shape come to life. My body is always tense. My heart beats too fast. My stomach churns with every passing reflection. That shadowy outline remains following me, lingering behind every corner of glass or polished metal. It's just waiting for the right moment. And I'm stuck, hoping that moment never comes. I didn't plan on running into anything strange in that place. I just wanted to get away from city noise for a while. People called it the Stone Forest, and I thought it would be calm. I had my guitar and a few recording tools. I expected a quiet trip, just me and the rocks. That first night I realized I was wrong. I heard sounds that didn't belong to the wind or to any animal I knew. They sounded like voices, drawn out and low, echoing around those tall formations. I felt my stomach twist. I've played in a lot of weird venues, but I'd never heard anything like that. I stayed in my tent, eyes open, ears alert, heart thumping. I tried to record some of it, but I got strange static. I saw shapes in the corner of my vision. That was only the beginning. I arrived early in the day. The place was huge. There were massive rocks jutting up from the ground in clusters, some in tall spires, others in thick columns. The sunlight was strong, and I could see every edge on those rocks. Dust rose up under my boots each time I took a step. I tried to find a good spot to set up my tent, away from any trails or potential tourists. I picked a small clearing surrounded by 3 large rock pillars. The air was still. I heard a few distant birds, but not much else. I felt calm. It was warm, and my shirt stuck to my back. I set up my tent, unrolled my sleeping bag, and made sure my guitar case was in the shade. I also put my small battery-operated recorder in a safe spot. Then I took a look around, trying to get a feel for the place. The afternoon went by quietly. I walked around with my guitar, playing a few chords to test the echo. The sound bounced off the rocks in a hollow way. It was a bit eerie, but I liked it. I sat down on a flat stone and strummed a few progressions. I paused to listen. I heard only my own notes echoing back. I tried singing a short melody, but my voice felt too loud in that open space. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing in. There was no breeze, and the sun glared on everything. I decided to save my voice for the evening. I took some pictures of the rock formations, but they all looked the same after a while. Everything was gray and brown. Nothing moved. By sunset, I felt uneasy, though I didn't know why. I started a small fire on a patch of gravel and heated some canned food. I ate with my back against a large boulder. The night sky turned dark fast. The temperature dropped. I put on a jacket and tried to relax. I wasn't hearing any insects, which felt odd. Usually at night there's some kind of buzzing or chirping, but I didn't notice anything. It was just silence. A few times I heard a scraping sound on the rocks, but I chalked it up to loose stones or something natural. I looked at the sky. It was clear and the stars were bright. I felt alone, which was what I had wanted. I kept telling myself that. I planned to record a few guitar licks the next day. Then I'd go home with some new ideas. I crawled into my tent around 10. I turned off my flashlight and pulled the sleeping bag up to my neck. I closed my eyes. I felt a strange vibe, like the place was waiting for something, but I ignored it and tried to sleep. After a while, I heard a faint sound. It reminded me of a distant moan, but it rose and fell in a strange pattern. I sat up. My chest felt tight. I listened. The sound echoed between the rocks, so it was hard to locate where it came from. It lasted for about 30 seconds, then faded. I stayed still, breathing fast. Then I heard it again. It sounded like a chant, long and drawn out, full of low tones. I fumbled for my small recorder. I unzipped the tent door and stuck my head out. The moonlight lit up the pillars around me. I hit record on the device and pointed it at the nearest cluster of rocks. I caught a glimpse of something moving between the stones. It wasn't solid. It shimmered in the moonlight, but I could see the outlines of the rocks behind it. I tried to focus, but it disappeared. My heart pounded. I looked down at the recorder's screen. I saw static spikes jumping erratically. I tried to adjust the settings, but the noise kept popping in and out. The chanting sound continued, fading in and out. My mouth went dry. I felt goosebumps on my arms. The chanting stopped suddenly, and everything went quiet. I crawled back inside and zipped the tent. I lay there, heart hammering. I thought about packing up and leaving right then, but it was too dark to navigate the rough terrain. I decided to wait until morning. I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing faint murmurs in my dreams. Once I sat up, convinced I saw a shape at the entrance of my tent, but there was no one. I fell in and out of restless half-sleep until sunlight came. When I finally unzipped the tent, I felt relieved by the daylight. The air was cold. I could see my breath. The rocks looked the same as before, though. I checked my recorder. The battery was half drained, which was weird because it had been fully charged. I played back the audio. There was a bunch of crackling static and interference. I heard some faint howling, but it was distorted. I packed the recorder away and decided to walk around. I found a path that led deeper into the formation. The pillars grew taller there. I saw weird vertical grooves on some of them, like claw marks, but I couldn't tell what caused them. I touched one of the grooves and the rock felt cold and rough. My guitar was back at the tent, so I just had my phone and a small day pack with some water. As I walked, I thought about the chanting. I tried to reason that maybe it was wind passing through the rocks, but the pattern sounded too human. My pulse was still racing from the night before. I drank some water and kept moving. I saw no animals, no footprints, and no people. I expected at least a few tourists, but there was nobody. The stone forest seemed deserted. Around noon, I returned to the tent. I decided to test the acoustics in a different way. I took out my guitar and set up my recorder on a tripod. I played a scale that climbed in pitch and I watched the recorder. At a certain high note, I felt a chill run through my body. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. My fingers slipped on the fretboard. I stopped and looked around. The echo lingered longer than usual. I waited. I felt a slight pressure in my ears, like the air changed density, but I heard nothing else. I tried the same scale again, same effect. I shivered. Then I turned off the recorder and put it in my tent. I wasn't sure what was going on, but it made me uneasy. I ate a quick lunch, just a protein bar and some water, and I decided to do a short hike. I walked around some of the formations, brushing my hand over the surfaces. The wind picked up a little. I saw loose sand blow across the ground. The sky stayed clear. The sun was intense and I started sweating again. I took pictures, but most were just tall rocks against a bright sky. After an hour, I climbed one of the smaller boulders to get a better view. I saw more pillars stretching out in rows. The place looked endless. I felt a tightness in my chest again. Everything felt too still. I climbed back down. In the late afternoon, I returned to camp. I sat by the tent, not sure if I wanted to stay another night, but I had told myself I would spend at least 2 nights here. I thought maybe I could record more of those sounds if they happened again. I set up my small fire, but I kept it low to avoid drawing attention. I ate another can of food. The temperature dropped faster this time. The wind died down after sunset. I sat in the darkness, listening. My guitar was on my lap, but I didn't play anything right away. I was scared to trigger those strange sensations again. I only strummed a few low chords. Nothing happened. After an hour, I felt tired. I decided to try sleeping. I crawled into the tent. My nerves were shot from the night before, but I tried to calm down. I dozed off for maybe half an hour. Then I heard that chanting again. It started low, almost like a hum, but it got louder. It sounded like multiple voices, but I couldn't make out any words. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent door. My breathing was shallow. The sound echoed from all directions. I looked at the recorder. Its lights were blinking erratically. My gut twisted. Then I saw something move behind a pillar. I aimed the flashlight. I caught a glimpse of a pale, translucent figure. It looked like a person, but I could see the rock behind it. My throat went dry. I tried to speak, but no words came out. The figure swayed, then vanished behind the rock. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my temples. I moved toward the pillar, shining the beam of light across the ground. My footsteps sounded loud on the gravel. I felt shaky. When I got there, I found nothing, just the rough surface of stone. I heard the chanting start again behind me this time. I spun around, shining the light. I saw 3 or 4 translucent shapes gliding between the pillars. They moved in a silent dance, arms outstretched, heads tilted back. Their mouths were open, but I didn't see faces. The chanting kept going, echoing in the space. I took a step back and stumbled on a loose rock. I fell, scraping my hand. The flashlight rolled away. I scrambled after it, breathing hard. The chanting got louder for a moment, then stopped. When I got the flashlight back in my hand, the figures were gone. I sat there on the gravel, my hand stinging, blood trickling from a small cut. I felt dizzy. The silence returned. I didn't know what to do. I grabbed the flashlight, forced myself up, and stumbled to my tent. I zipped it shut, my hands shaking. I fumbled for my phone. I had no signal. My thoughts were racing. I had never seen anything like that in my life. I was exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. I sat with my back to the tent wall, just staring at the entrance. The hours passed slowly. I heard soft whispers every now and then, but nothing like the chanting. My eyelids felt heavy. I drifted in and out of awareness until morning light crept in. When the sun rose, I realized I needed to leave. I packed my gear as quickly as I could. My fingers were stiff from the cold and from fear. I didn't want to be there another night. I shoved my guitar into its case, threw my supplies into my backpack, and collapsed my tent. I didn't bother to eat. I just wanted out. I walked back toward the way I came in. My feet dragged and my legs felt weak. The air was still as I made my way through the winding paths between the tall pillars. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see one of those shapes. I saw nothing. The only sound was the crunch of my boots and my labored breathing. I reached my car around midday. My chest was tight the whole way. I tossed my gear into the trunk and slammed it shut. I got into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and started the engine. My hands shook on the steering wheel. I looked back at the rock formations towering over the horizon. Then I drove off, keeping my eyes forward, heart thumping. I just wanted to get as much distance as possible. That night at home, I tried to listen to what I recorded. Most of it was static. In a few parts, I heard those voices humming, but it was too distorted to make out anything clear. I saw strange flickers in the video recording, like pale outlines moving across the frame. The audio clipped and buzzed. My laptop froze a couple times. I tried to clean up the file, but nothing helped. It only made me more unsettled. I turned off the computer. My hands felt cold, and my stomach churned. I remembered the shapes moving in that silent dance. Over the next few days, I tried to practice my guitar at home. Whenever I hit a high note, I got this sudden chill, like a current running through my body. My neck tensed up, and I remembered those flickering shapes. It felt like something was there, just behind me. My breath would catch in my throat. Sometimes I'd stop playing and turn around, half expecting to see one of them. I never saw anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling. My mind kept going back to that place and those voices echoing in the dark. Sometimes I woke up at night, certain I heard chanting. I'd scramble out of bed, heart pounding, only to realize I was in my apartment. Then I'd lie awake, trying to calm down. I tried to share the story with a friend, but I left out the part about the translucent shapes. I just said I heard weird sounds and got creeped out. He laughed and said maybe it was the wind or some local singers messing around. I didn't push it. I knew what I saw. I tried to move on with my life, but I couldn't. My music changed. I found myself avoiding the higher notes. My hands shook when I tried to play them. My recording sounded off. I kept checking over my shoulder, expecting to see flickers of movement. I never did, but the tension stayed. I don't know what's in that stone forest. I only know that it reacts to sound. It responds to certain notes, especially the higher range. I felt it in my body like an electric shock. I saw those shapes transparent and moving in a way that didn't feel human. Sometimes late at night, I think I hear them calling again, a low chant that sends chills through me. I'm not sure if it's just in my head or if something followed me, but I can't forget it. My music has never been the same, and my nights are still uneasy. It's like something lingers in the back of my mind, waiting. I have no plans to return to that place. I wanted inspiration, and I found something else. I'm still not sure if it let me go or if it's still there, humming in the distance, ready to join in whenever I hit that note again. And that's all I can say. I'm done chasing silence in places like that. I'll stay in the city where I can hear the usual noises and leave the chanting to the rocks. I felt a jolt in my spine the day I opened that old leather-bound book. There was a strange odor coming off the pages, like damp cardboard left in a basement for too long. I'm used to musty smells because I've collected old books for years, but this was different. It clung to my nostrils and made me blink. The title was missing on the cover, just cracked leather with faint scratches. I'm not sure why it grabbed my attention more than the other volumes in that wooden crate, but I remember the way my hands trembled a bit when I flipped through the first pages. That was the start of a series of strange events that made me question my own senses. Now, I'm not one to believe in curses or haunted objects, but something about this particular book made me uneasy. It felt like someone was breathing over my shoulder every time I touched it. My name is David. I inherited a large collection of books from a distant relative who passed away without leaving much of a will. A lawyer contacted me by phone, said there was a crate of rare volumes that belonged to some old uncle I barely remembered. I picked it up from his office one afternoon, lugging it home in the trunk of my station wagon. My house is a bit out of the way, near the edge of town, with enough space to store all my books. The attic is crammed with shelves, and the hallway walls are lined with old titles. I've always taken pride in how organized I keep them. That changed when I introduced this new batch of books into the mix. The crate itself looked unimpressive. It had some stains and loose nails. Inside I found about 20 volumes, most of them in bad condition. Dust-covered jackets, missing pages, and some with odd scribbles on the inside covers. Then I saw the leather-bound book without a title. It was thicker than the others and had a dark brown cover that might have been black at some point. The corners had steel protectors, maybe bronze, I'm not sure. When I lifted it, I noticed how heavy it felt. It didn't budge easily. I laid it on my desk and flipped it open. The pages were brittle and smelled like wet soil mixed with old library shelves. Right away I saw these disturbing illustrations of strange creatures. Some had elongated limbs, others had blank faces. The lines were sharp and the ink looked faded. My first thought was that it could be some kind of medieval text, maybe a bestiary. But there was no recognizable text on the first few pages, just symbols that I couldn't interpret. After I flipped a few more pages, I felt a discomfort in my chest. A tightness like I couldn't fully expand my lungs. I heard a faint rustling sound nearby. At first I thought it was just the pages shifting in the breeze from the open window. But the window was closed. The air in my study was stagnant and warm. I brushed it off, thinking I was just tired. I closed the book and left it on the desk. I didn't try reading more that day. Instead, I placed it on a separate shelf, away from my usual sections. Over the next few days, I focused on organizing the rest of the books from the crate. Most were typical antique volumes, nothing too exciting, but I felt myself drawn to that one strange book. Every time I walked by the shelf, my eyes lingered on the spine. It had no markings, just worn leather. The first night I couldn't sleep was about 3 days after I brought the crate home. I woke up in the middle of the night with an odd feeling of being watched. My mouth was dry and I needed water. On my way to the kitchen, I noticed a faint light under the door to my study. I never leave that light on. My heart pounded, and I felt my breathing get shallow. I opened the door slowly, half expecting an intruder. The room was empty and the overhead lamp was off. The light came from a small desk lamp I rarely use. It was on, pointing directly at the leather-bound book on the desk. I stood there for a few moments, just staring at it. A chill swept through my arms. I turned the lamp off and hurried back to bed, feeling my pulse in my neck. The next morning, I tried to find a rational explanation. Maybe I accidentally switched on the lamp earlier and forgot about it. I started my day with a bit of dread in my gut. I lingered in the kitchen, sipping coffee, not really wanting to check my study again, but I forced myself to go in. The book was lying open, which confused me because I'd left it closed and shelved. I approached it and saw a page filled with more sketches. They showed hooded figures standing in a circle. I felt my mouth go dry again. I shut the book, pressed my hands on the desk to steady myself, and tried to shake off the discomfort. I told myself I was just mixing up details. Maybe I forgot that I left it open. My memory can be spotty when I'm distracted. I slid the book into a drawer, locked it, and dropped the key in my desk organizer. That day I went on with my usual tasks. I had some errands in town, a trip to the post office to send a package of old magazines to a friend, and a stop at the grocery store. While I was out, I kept thinking about the book. My stomach felt tense, and I noticed sweat gathering under my arms even though it wasn't hot outside. I told myself to calm down, that it was just a weird old book. When I got home in the late afternoon, I went straight to my study. The drawer was still locked, which brought me a moment of relief. I unlocked it and saw the book exactly where I'd left it, closed. I exhaled, feeling silly for my paranoia. I left it there and went to make dinner. That night, while I was reading in bed, I heard something upstairs. It sounded like pages turning, but louder than normal. I set my book down and listened carefully. My house is old, so it makes noises. Wooden floors creak, pipes make clanking sounds, but this was distinct. It was a soft rustle, then a pause, then another rustle. My heart started pounding again. I told myself it was the air vents or something else. When it didn't stop, I got up, slipped on some slippers, and stepped into the hallway. The sound grew clearer as I approached the staircase. My legs felt heavy as I climbed the steps. I flicked the hallway light on and walked slowly toward the door of my study. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear the rustling continue. I pushed the door open with my fingertips. The desk lamp was on again. The book lay open in the center of the desk, and the pages were flipping on their own. There was no breeze, and the window was closed. I stood frozen, my mind trying to come up with an explanation. Then the pages stopped turning. Everything went silent. I could hear my own breathing, fast and uneven. I felt a wave of nausea. My mouth tasted sour. I forced myself to take a step forward and place my hand on the book to keep the pages from moving. The paper felt cold, even though the room was warm. I closed the book slowly. My hands shook so much that I had to grip the edges tightly. I turned off the lamp and backed out of the room without looking behind me. I left the door open. As I headed back downstairs, I heard a faint creak behind me, but I didn't turn around. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, the TV on low volume, just to have some noise in the house. In the morning, I woke up with a stiff neck and a dull headache. My lower back ached from the uncomfortable position on the couch. I forced myself to get up and shuffle into the kitchen for some coffee. I felt anxious about checking the study, but I couldn't avoid it forever. Around 9 in the morning, I headed back up. The door was still open, and the lamp was off. The book was on the desk, closed. I wanted to get rid of it, but a stubborn part of me needed to understand what was happening. I picked it up and flipped a few pages. My hands felt sweaty, and the pages stuck slightly. I noticed illustrations of bizarre creatures like the ones I'd seen earlier. There were hooded figures in several scenes, each posed in different gestures. Some looked like they were raising their arms. Others looked like they were staring out of the page. Each time I looked at one of those hooded shapes, I felt a tingling on the back of my neck. The text in the margins was unreadable, a series of strange letters or symbols. I slammed it shut. I decided to try storing it in the attic, out of sight. I grabbed a thick plastic bag from the kitchen, slid the book inside, and sealed it. Then I walked up the narrow attic steps, breathing heavily with each step. My arms felt weak. I found an old trunk where I keep random odds and ends. I unlocked it, stuffed the book in there, and locked it again. I told myself that was enough. I went back downstairs and tried to distract myself with a regular routine. I cleaned the living room, dusted some shelves, and sorted through old records. But every so often I caught myself glancing toward the ceiling, feeling uneasy. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Around midnight, I heard a noise upstairs. This time it wasn't pages turning. It sounded like soft footsteps or maybe fabric dragging across the floor. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my wrists. I got out of bed and grabbed a flashlight. The entire house was dark. My mind kept telling me not to go upstairs, but I couldn't ignore the sounds. I crept up, each step making a slight creak. My throat was dry and I swallowed hard. When I reached the attic door, I paused. The noise had stopped. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob. It was cold to the touch. I turned it slowly and peeked inside. Pitch black. I flicked the flashlight on, sweeping the beam around the dusty space. Boxes and shelves cast shadows. My trunk was in the corner, closed as I left it. I took a few steps forward, the floorboards groaning under my weight. I kneeled in front of the trunk and checked the lock. It was intact. The book was still inside. I could smell that same musty odor, stronger than before, like moldy paper. As I stood up, I felt something behind me. I spun around, shining the flashlight wildly. I caught a glimpse of a dark shape in the corner, near a stack of old crates. My breath caught in my throat. It looked like a figure draped in a black hood, but it was difficult to see clearly. My legs tensed and I stumbled backward, knocking over a small box. The shape vanished behind the crates. I gasped. my heart racing. I backed away slowly, flashlight trembling in my grip. I didn't hear anything else, just my own breathing. I slammed the attic door shut and rushed downstairs. I locked myself in my bedroom, pressing my back against the door. My body was covered in sweat and I felt lightheaded. I sat on the floor and tried to slow my breathing. My arms tingled with pins and needles. Eventually, I moved to my bed and lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening for any sound. Nothing else happened that night, but I didn't sleep a wink. The next morning, I decided to do some research. I wanted to know if there was any record of this book. I spent hours online searching for descriptions or images that matched the symbols or illustrations. I found nothing conclusive. My head throbbed from staring at the screen. I felt an urge to open the trunk again and examine the book more thoroughly. But I fought that urge. My gut told me to leave it alone. The hooded figure I saw in the attic still haunted me. I kept thinking maybe my eyes tricked me, or maybe it was a shadow from the flashlight. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I saw something real. Over the next few days, the sounds continued. Sometimes it was pages turning at odd hours. Other times I heard faint creaks that seemed to follow me from room to room. I started catching glimpses of that hooded shape in my peripheral vision. I'd turn quickly and it would be gone. My stress levels shot through the roof. I couldn't eat well, and I kept losing track of simple tasks. Once, while making coffee, I dropped the mug because I thought I saw that figure reflected in the kitchen window. When I looked again, it was gone. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. After about a week of this, I decided to pull the trunk down from the attic and move it to the garage. I thought maybe keeping the book even farther away would help. I dragged the trunk downstairs in the late afternoon when the house felt less eerie. I heaved it into the garage and left it in a corner. I locked the garage door from inside and told myself I was done with it. I tried to reclaim some normalcy by playing some music in the living room, sorting through newspapers and ignoring the sense of dread that lingered in my stomach. That night, I woke up to the smell of mold again. It was so strong it made me gag. I realized it was coming from my bedroom door. The hallway was dark. I rolled out of bed and fumbled for the light switch. My heart hammered in my chest. The hallway light revealed footprints on the floor like damp outlines, leading from the stairs toward my bedroom. Each print looked like a wet shape, too large to be mine, and slightly misshapen at the heel. My breath caught in my throat. I listened closely but heard nothing. I followed the prints back toward the stairs. They vanished at the top step. I felt dizzy. My chest tightened, and sweat ran down the sides of my face. I haven't found a good explanation for what's happening. The book remains in that trunk in the garage. I can't bring myself to open it again. Every time I think about those illustrations of hooded figures, I feel a knot in my stomach. I see fleeting shapes in the corners of my home. I hear the constant rustling of pages at night, and I sense movement in the shadows. I've tried staying away from the house, spending afternoons in coffee shops or libraries, but I always come back. It's my home, and I refuse to be chased away by a book. But I don't know how to make it stop. I keep the house lights on late into the night now. I lock my study door, even though I rarely go in there. My sleep is fitful, and I wake up every couple of hours, scanning the room for signs of anything out of place. I think about burning the book, but a part of me fears that might make things worse. I've even considered calling someone who deals with antique texts, but I can't quite explain what's happening without sounding unhinged. Right now, I'm just trying to get through each day without losing my composure. The sounds haven't stopped, and the shape in the corner of my vision appears more often. My heart rate spikes every time it happens, and I can't catch my breath until I'm certain I'm alone again. That's my life now. I live with this constant tension, waiting for the next whisper of pages turning in an empty room. I had no idea what waited for me when I decided to rent that secluded country house. I went there looking for some time away from my cramped apartment and noisy neighbors. I wanted to breathe fresh air and clear my head for a few weeks. On the surface, it looked like a simple plan. A quiet place, a cozy living room, and a fireplace to keep me warm during the colder nights. I arrived on a Thursday, parked my car in the gravel driveway, and felt a bit of excitement at the thought of a peaceful weekend. My plan was to relax, cook a couple of hearty meals, and maybe read a little before falling asleep on the old couch by the fire. But the first cold night changed everything. I stepped inside the house around noon, dropped my suitcase on the floor, and went straight to check the rooms. The living room was spacious, with a sturdy old couch facing a stone fireplace that stretched almost to the ceiling. There were wooden beams across the ceiling that creaked when I walked. The kitchen was small but had all the basics: a fridge, a stove, and a sink with a single window overlooking a patch of trees. The bedroom smelled of dusty blankets. The place looked like nobody had stayed there for a while. When I opened the closet to hang a few shirts, I saw some spider webs in the corners. I brushed them away with my hand, trying not to think about spiders crawling around at night. After unpacking, I headed to the nearest grocery store, about 15 minutes away by car, and bought canned soup, bread, and a few bottles of water. I picked up some firewood from a small stand near the store. The man selling it told me the nights in that area got colder than most people expected, even when it was mild during the day. That evening, I lit the fireplace for the first time. I arranged the logs, put some kindling underneath, and struck a match. The flames caught quickly. A gentle crackling sound filled the living room, and I sat on the couch with a soft blanket draped over my legs. At first, I felt a sense of calm while I stared at the flames. They danced over the wood, casting flickering shadows on the walls. I leaned my head back and took a deep breath. My mind drifted away from the city, work deadlines, and my usual stress. But around 20 minutes later, something unusual drew my attention. The flames shifted in a strange way. I leaned forward and squinted. For a second, I thought I saw a human face in the fire. It wasn't clear, but I could make out what looked like eyes, cheeks, and a chin outlined by the light. My first thought was that the logs were arranged in some weird position, creating that shape by accident. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. The face disappeared just as quickly as it had formed. I felt a chill run down my arms. My mouth went dry, but I tried to brush it off. I told myself it was a coincidence, just the fire and shadows playing tricks. Still, I felt uneasy. I got up, grabbed a glass from the kitchen, and gulped down some water. I walked to the fireplace and poked the logs with the iron tool, trying to break them apart a bit, hoping that would change the way the flames moved. The face didn't reappear. After a while, the fire died down to embers, and I threw another log in to keep the warmth going. Then I curled up on the couch and dozed off. That night, I woke up shivering around 2 a.m. The fire had almost gone out, and I saw only faint orange spots in the hearth. My breath came out in little puffs of steam. I got up, rubbed my arms to get some warmth, and stacked a few pieces of wood in the fireplace again. I struck a match and lit a small piece of tinder. Once the new flames rose, I stood back and watched. My heart pounded harder than usual, and I realized I was waiting to see if the face would appear again. At first, it was just a normal fire, bright and crackling with sparks. Then, as I stared, I saw the shape form again. This time it looked more distinct. The lips moved, but there was no sound. My chest tightened, and I found myself taking quick, shallow breaths. The hair on my arms prickled. I blinked several times, but the face remained for a good 5 or 6 seconds. Then it faded back into a swirl of orange and red. I backed away, feeling my legs shake. I didn't know what to do, so I grabbed a throw pillow and pressed it against my chest. My heart thumped against my ribs. A thick, acrid smell came from the chimney, like damp soot mixed with old ash. I felt my nostrils burn. Smoke drifted upward and spread across the ceiling in thin trails. It almost looked like it was forming shapes along the wood beams, but I tried not to stare too closely at that. My thoughts raced. I considered the possibility of some sort of hallucination. I rubbed my face, trying to make sense of what I had seen. I was too uneasy to go back to sleep in the living room, so I moved to the bedroom. I shut the door and crawled under the covers, fully dressed. My breath was rapid and my skin felt clammy. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the face in the flames. At some point, I drifted off out of sheer exhaustion. In the morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. My head throbbed from a lack of proper rest. I got dressed, ate a slice of bread, and decided to open all the windows to let some fresh air in. The living room still smelled like smoke. There was a faint black residue in the corners of the fireplace. I took my time cleaning up the ashes and debris, hoping a more thorough cleanup would help me feel better about using the fireplace again. While I scooped out the ashes, I felt my arms shake. I told myself I was just tired. I spent most of the day outside, walking around the property and checking out a small trail behind the house. I kicked at the leaves and looked at the old oak trees. The sun warmed my shoulders, and for a few hours I felt almost normal. By evening, the temperature dropped again. I stood in the living room, staring at the fireplace. I tried to convince myself that the face was just a weird trick of the light and my imagination. With a sigh, I stacked the logs again. My fingers felt stiff from tension, but I forced myself to light the fire. I sat on the couch and watched. The flames rose and crackled, and at first everything seemed normal. Then I saw it again. The face. It stayed longer this time, and I could see the eyes shifting as though they were scanning the room. The mouth opened, and it looked like it was trying to speak, but no sound came out. It was like someone was gasping for air, but I only heard the crackling of burning wood. My hands clenched into fists. My legs felt weak, and I had to hold on to the armrest to stay upright. All the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt my heartbeat pound in my ears. The smoke gathered around the ceiling again, drifting along the wooden beams. I walked backward until I bumped into the kitchen counter. My eyes wouldn't leave the fireplace. The face seemed to follow me, tracking my movement. Finally, I grabbed the fire extinguisher from under the sink. I aimed it at the flames, ready to spray if something got worse. But I stopped myself before pulling the trigger. A part of me wanted to see if there was a logical explanation. I wondered if the chimney was blocked, or if something was inside the fireplace creating these shapes. But I didn't move closer to check. My instincts screamed at me to keep my distance. The face disappeared again, fading back into the usual flicker of a normal fire. I stayed by the kitchen counter, panting with nerves. My vision wavered from adrenaline, and I realized I was gripping the fire extinguisher so hard my knuckles were white. I set it down slowly. My mouth felt dry, and my throat hurt. I forced myself to drink some water. My hands trembled, and I had trouble swallowing. The room smelled of smoky air and a slight hint of something musty that I couldn't identify. I decided to leave the house for a while. I slipped on my jacket, grabbed my keys, and climbed into my car. My breath felt shallow and my chest was tight. I drove out to a nearby diner and sat at the counter. I ordered coffee and tried to calm down. My fingers tapped on the countertop, and I avoided eye contact with the waitress. I stared at the faded menu, reading each line again and again. Eventually, I felt my pulse slow. My shoulders relaxed a bit. I spent 2 hours there, finishing a burger and more coffee than I needed. When I returned to the house, it was late and the living room was cold. The fireplace was empty except for a few embers. I sat in the darkness for a minute, deciding whether to ignite the fireplace again. My body tensed at the thought. The house felt oppressive and the air felt heavier than before. I shivered, even though I was wearing a thick sweater. I thought about leaving, but I didn't want to pack my things in the middle of the night and drive hours back to the city. Plus, I was curious. Something in me wanted to see if the face would come back. I lit the fireplace one more time, standing by it with a match in my hand. When the flames caught, I stepped back and waited. The first few minutes were uneventful. I moved the logs around, trying to see if there was any abnormal piece of wood. Maybe a log had a pattern that resembled a face, but they all looked ordinary. Rough bark, some cracks, nothing that looked like eyes or a mouth. Then it happened again. The face formed in the center of the flames. It looked like it was pressing forward, trying to break through the fire. The lips parted, and I saw the cheeks pull inward, as though the face was drawing breath. But the only sound was the hiss of burning wood and the crackling of the logs. I felt dizzy. My head throbbed, and I thought I might pass out from the shock. My heart felt like it would burst. I forced myself to keep my eyes open. My hands shook and my breath came in ragged gasps. A bead of sweat ran down my temple even though the air was cold. The face's expression looked tormented. I felt pressure in my own chest, like I was getting dragged into the fire. My hands tingled. I inhaled through my nose and smelled that thick smoke again, along with the musty scent from the chimney. Then I noticed the smoke wasn't just going up. It was drifting out into the room close to the ceiling, forming thin, swirling lines. I watched those lines gather in the corners, almost like they were creeping across the house. My eyes stung. Each breath felt painful, like I couldn't get enough oxygen. I coughed a few times and stumbled backward, trying to find the window. I turned the latch and pushed it open. Cold night air rushed in, and I took a deep gulp. My vision blurred for a second, and I had to blink rapidly. I spun around to face the fireplace again. The face was gone. The flames looked normal, and the smoke began to move upward through the chimney. I still felt shaky. I sank into the couch, trying to process what I had seen. My heartbeat thumped in my ears. The air in the room felt stale and thick despite the open window. I heard a soft crackle from the fire and the slight creaking of the wooden beams overhead. I ended up sitting there for an hour, too scared to go to bed but too tired to keep pacing around. Every small noise made me jump. I kept glancing at the fireplace, waiting for the face to appear again. It didn't. The logs burned down, and eventually the heat subsided. I grabbed an extra blanket and slept on the couch with the window open. My sleep was restless, filled with sudden jerks where I woke up gasping for air. At one point I thought I heard a whisper, but when I opened my eyes the room was silent except for the ticking clock in the kitchen. Over the next days, I tried different methods to see if I could stop these appearances. I cleaned the chimney with a brush I found in the shed. I scraped out every bit of soot and built up ash. I even called a local chimney service, but they said they couldn't come out for another week. I bought new firewood from a different supplier, thinking maybe something about the old logs caused odd patterns in the flames. Still, whenever I lit the fireplace, the face appeared at least once. Each time, it lasted longer. Each time, the lips moved more desperately. I never heard a voice or any words, but I saw a silent plea. The smoke continued to swirl in strange ways. It often hovered below the ceiling before thinning out. One afternoon, I tried recording it on my phone. I set up the camera on a chair and hit record, but the footage just showed fire and some bursts of light. The face was never clear on camera. I replayed the videos and only saw quick flickers that could have been anything, but in person I saw it plainly. It was like the face refused to be captured electronically. Every night I went to bed exhausted, feeling the weight of the stale air in my lungs. My mind buzzed with questions. I didn't bother inviting friends or telling anyone in detail, because I knew they would suggest I come back to the city or see a therapist. Deep down, I wanted to understand what was happening. I wanted an explanation that didn't involve me losing my mind, but I couldn't find one. The house felt claustrophobic and the smell of old smoke clung to everything, including my clothes. I wasn't sleeping well, and each morning I woke up drenched in sweat. My muscles felt tense all day. When I left the house to buy groceries or gas, my eyes darted around, checking if anyone noticed how uneasy I looked. Nobody ever asked, but I caught my reflection in the glass doors of shops. I saw dark circles under my eyes and a constant frown on my face. I kept expecting some final escalation. Each time the face appeared, I thought something worse would happen, but it never did more than look at me and move its lips. It only radiated that deep, silent anguish. Still, it wore me down. I felt trapped by my own curiosity. I couldn't ignore it. Eventually, I decided I'd had enough. I stayed for almost 2 weeks, but I couldn't rest. My body ached from tension, and my nerves were frayed. One morning, I collected my things, packed up the car, and locked the house behind me. On my last look at the living room, the air felt heavy, and the fireplace stood cold and empty. I turned away, started the engine, and left. I've tried to forget the way the face moved and how the smoke pushed against the ceiling, but it stuck in my mind. Even now, sometimes when I light a candle in my apartment, I pause and wait for something to appear in the flame. It never does, but I still feel that sensation of a presence watching me, just beyond my field of vision. Sometimes I think about that silent mouth opening and closing in the fire, like it was trying to speak. I never knew what it wanted to say, and I'm not sure I want to find out. All I know is that I will never rent that house again, and I'll never look at a fireplace without remembering those eyes staring back at me in the flickering light. I gripped my backpack straps and squinted against the wind as I stood at the edge of the old village. The gusts never stopped. They hissed around broken walls and tore through doorways without doors. Rocks crunched under my boots, and dust swirled around my legs. I was there to take pictures of the ruins. I wanted to capture what was left of this place on the hill. People said nobody stayed here for long because of the unrelenting wind, but I felt drawn to it anyway. I climbed a crumbling stone step and stepped onto a narrow path. Everything felt deserted. The walls of the nearest house were half collapsed, leaving only a corner standing. Pieces of wood that might have been roof beams lay scattered on the ground. I heard the wind push them around. The noise sounded harsh, a scraping that reminded me of heavy chairs dragged across a rough floor. I kept moving, snapping a few photos as I went. My camera clicked in my hands and I glanced at the images on the small screen. The pictures showed rubble, shadows, and a wide sky covered in fast-moving clouds. My heart pounded more than usual. I was alone, but I still felt a sensation that I couldn't explain. It was a tightness in my chest. Part of it was excitement, and part of it was something like anxiety. I had known this place was supposed to be creepy, but I hadn't expected the wind itself to feel alive. I stopped in front of a collapsed well. The wind shifted directions and blasted me from behind. My jacket flapped so loudly that I could barely hear my own breathing. Then I heard something else. My name. It was just one word. It sounded like it came from right behind me. My body tensed and I spun around so fast that I almost dropped my camera. Nobody was there. There was only the wind, throwing dust against a broken doorway. My mouth felt dry. I told myself that maybe the sound was a trick of the wind. Still, my legs felt wobbly and my palms got sweaty. I gripped my camera tighter and took one slow step backward. I aimed my camera at the doorway and took a picture. I checked the preview. I saw nothing but splintered wood and a jagged outline of stone. I took a deep breath and walked deeper into the village. The path wound around a few houses whose roofs had caved in. I saw scraps of cloth in the rubble. I spotted twisted metal that might have been part of a cooking pot. I took more pictures. Sometimes the wind died down enough for me to hear my own footsteps. My heartbeat still thumped in my ears and I kept glancing over my shoulder. I had the growing impression that someone might step out from behind a wall at any moment. I told myself to calm down. The place was abandoned. I had driven for over an hour to get up here, and I hadn't seen a single person on the road, let alone in the village. I reached what looked like a small square. In the center, I found a platform made of stone blocks. I guessed it used to be where the community gathered for announcements or something like that. The wind circled around me, rattling a piece of corrugated metal on a nearby roof. It clanged over and over, and the noise made me grit my teeth. I lifted my camera and took a few shots of the square. Then I noticed movement on the right. It was a shadow at the corner of another house. It seemed to pull back as soon as I turned my head. My breath caught in my throat. I felt my muscles tighten. I took a step toward it, waiting to see if someone would come out. But nothing happened. I walked around the corner. There was only a pile of rubble and a battered wooden door leaning against the wall. No footprints. No sign of a person. The wind picked up again, sending a swirl of dust across the ground. I stood there, listening to my own breathing. My stomach felt uneasy. I noticed goosebumps on my arms even though I wore a jacket. I exhaled and moved on. I decided to enter one of the more intact houses. The roof had a large hole, but at least 2 walls were still standing. The door was missing, so I just walked in. Broken furniture covered the floor. A table lay on its side, and chairs were smashed to pieces. I saw plates scattered around, some of them chipped, others in shards. I tried to imagine what happened here, but I stopped myself. I focused on what I could see, not on daydreams. I crouched and took pictures of the debris. My camera's flash lit up the dark corners. Every time I snapped a shot, dust particles rose in the air. Then I froze. The wind blew against the house, and I heard something that sounded like a greeting. My name again. I heard it more clearly this time. It was not just a muffled sound in the breeze. It was like a faint whisper, so close that I felt it against my ear. My entire body went rigid. My heartbeat got louder, and I felt a flush of heat in my face. I didn't move at first, I just held my breath and listened. My eyes darted around the room, searching for any hint of movement. The voice stopped. My instincts told me to check behind me, so I spun around, shining my flashlight at the collapsed part of the roof. Nothing was there. The wind pushed in, making the beams creak. I realized I was shaking. My arms were tense, and my legs felt unsteady. I wanted to leave the building, but I also felt a strong urge to see more. I wanted to see if there was any trace of the voice that called my name. I stood up slowly, scanning the walls with my flashlight. I moved past the broken table. My boots crushed pieces of glass underfoot. The sound made me wince. I thought about calling out, but my throat felt tight and I decided against it. Suddenly, I heard a loud thud from the corner to my left. I jumped and nearly dropped my flashlight. It was a chunk of the ceiling that had fallen onto a cupboard. Dust rose in a cloud and I coughed. My eyes watered. I hurried back outside, stepping over the threshold as quickly as I could. I felt the wind hit me in the face again. It was like stepping into a harsh current of air. I tasted grit in my mouth. Back in the open, I tried to calm down. I paused near a cracked wall, breathing slowly. My pulse was still racing, and I could hear it in my ears. I decided to move on to the next row of houses. Maybe I would find something interesting to photograph there that would distract me from the weird sensations. As I walked between two houses, I noticed new shadows at the end of the narrow passage. I held my flashlight up, but the beam didn't reveal anything beyond rubble and old bricks. I pressed my back against the left wall for a moment, feeling the rough stones against my jacket. My heart thumped hard. I could still feel an unsettling presence. It was like someone was watching me. Again, no visible shapes or figures. Just that feeling at the back of my neck. The wind picked up even more. Loose debris clattered across the ground. I heard faint sounds that reminded me of voices. I turned my head from side to side, trying to pinpoint the source. It seemed to come from all around, carried on the gusts. I caught fragments of words, bits of conversation I couldn't make out, and something that sounded like chanting or soft singing. My arms felt heavy and my stomach churned. I mumbled to myself that it had to be the wind making those odd echoes. I walked around another collapsed building and found a larger house that still had part of its roof intact. Its door was half torn off, hanging by one hinge. I stepped inside. The interior smelled musty and damp. My flashlight revealed a hallway. The walls had faded paint and the floor was cracked. There was a large room off to the left that looked like a living area. I saw a stone fireplace, its chimney mostly gone. I pointed my camera at the fireplace and took a shot. The flash revealed shapes around me, but I tried to ignore any illusions. I just wanted a record of what was there. I took a few steps toward the far wall. My flashlight beam showed shelves that had fallen, and there were books on the ground. Their pages were wet and stuck together. I leaned down, snapping a picture. Then I heard a faint laugh. It came from right above me. My scalp tingled, and I looked up. The ceiling had a large hole, and I saw the remains of an upstairs room. I aimed my flashlight there, expecting maybe an animal or something else. All I saw was rotted wood and a broken bed frame. The laugh faded into the wind, and I swallowed hard. My heartbeat pounded in my temples. I walked back to the hallway, shining my flashlight into another room. It might have been a kitchen. Rusted pots and pans were scattered on the floor. A few hung from the walls, swaying slightly in the draft. The wind's howl changed tone, and I heard what sounded like a soft prayer. It was like multiple voices layered together. too faint to make out distinct words. My stomach felt tight. I whispered to myself, trying to reassure my nerves, but my voice sounded shaky. As I inched forward, a dark shape flickered near the corner of my vision. I turned quickly, shining my flashlight along the walls. There was nothing. My breathing got faster. My shoulders ached from tension. I forced myself to keep going. I pushed open a door at the back and found a smaller room with a wooden floor. My flashlight revealed an overturned cabinet and a pile of old linens. The windows were shattered, letting the wind race through. It tugged at my clothing and scattered dust across the floor. I noticed the shape of footprints in the dust, though they looked old. I took a picture of them. My hands shook, and I had trouble holding the camera steady. I decided I needed fresh air again, so I exited the house through a side door. Out on the street, I noticed the light outside was getting dimmer. The clouds overhead were thick. The wind was still relentless. I tried to decide if I should keep exploring or head back while there was still some daylight. Part of me wanted to leave, but I also felt this pressure to stay. It was like the village wanted me to keep going. The echoes in the wind persisted. I heard faint traces of conversation, bits of laughter, snippets of chanting. Everything felt stuck between the walls of these ruined buildings. I walked into another alley. It was tight, and I could see the back walls of houses pressing in on both sides. Pieces of broken tile lay under my feet. My boots kept scraping against them, creating high-pitched squeaks that set my nerves on edge. I snapped more pictures. My camera beeped occasionally. I was running out of storage space, but I told myself I would pick the best shots later. Around the corner, I found a courtyard with a small fountain in the center. The stone was chipped, and the basin was dry. I could see cracks running through it, as if it had been left to decay for years. I noticed the remains of benches lining the courtyard. One bench was completely broken, while another was missing its seat. I raised my camera to document it. The wind rattled something metallic behind me. I turned, scanning the area. I saw a piece of metal gutter swinging from the edge of a rooftop. It clanged against the wall. The tension in my body didn't ease, though. My pulse stayed fast. Suddenly, the wind dropped for a moment. Everything became oddly quiet. I could hear my own ragged breathing. Then, so clearly it made my hair stand on end, I heard the voices again. This time, it was a series of words I couldn't understand. It sounded like old prayers or chants. I felt the weight of dread settle in my stomach. My eyes darted around, expecting to see someone. Nobody appeared. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling my heartbeat. I thought about leaving. I even took a few steps toward the entrance of the courtyard, but I stopped. Something inside me said I needed to document more. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was stubbornness. I wiped sweat from my forehead. I felt chilled by the wind, but my body was warm from fear and adrenaline. I walked toward the fountain, stepping around pieces of rubble. The wind returned with force, kicking up dust in a swirl. My eyes stung, and I had to blink rapidly. I snapped a picture of the fountain. The camera flash lit up the area, and for a split second I saw a figure near one of the benches. It looked like a person standing there. I gasped and aimed my flashlight in that direction. The bench was empty. My heart thudded so hard I felt it in my throat. I stood there, panting, staring at the spot. The wind kept pushing against me, tugging at my jacket. My mind raced. Had I imagined it? I was done. The tension in my chest felt like it would burst. I decided to leave the courtyard and head back to the path leading out of the village. I walked quickly, not running, but moving with purpose. My footsteps echoed on the cracked stones. Whenever the wind eased, I heard distant murmurs behind me. I kept my eyes straight ahead, only stopping once to check my camera's memory. It was almost full. I finally reached the edge of the village and paused near the stone step where I'd started. I turned around and looked at the broken buildings. The wind still whistled through them, creating eerie sounds that might have been whispers or echoes of the past. My hands felt clammy on my camera. My shoulders ached from tension. My mouth was dry and I tasted dust whenever I swallowed. I took one last photo of the entire scene. Then I heard the voice again. It spoke my name. It sounded soft, carried by the wind, but it was clear. I felt all the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I wanted to call out in response, but I couldn't make myself speak. My eyes burned from the dust and the stress. I turned and started walking down the rocky path. The wind chased me, pulling at my clothes. As I reached the bottom of the hill, the wind lessened a bit. I turned around one more time. The village sat there, silent and dark against the sky. I felt a chill in my chest. I inhaled, tasting the stale air still clinging to my lips. I clutched my camera against my side. I remembered the shadows that vanished when I approached them, the voices in the wind, the laughter that echoed through crumbling walls, and the silent presence that made my heart race. I didn't have any answers, but I had plenty of pictures. My name still echoed in my ears. I walked back to my car. My body felt tired, and my thoughts were scattered. I thought about the strange greetings, the shadows, and the prayers that seemed etched into every gust of wind. I felt relief as I reached my vehicle. The sky was turning a darker shade of gray. The wind howled one more time, and I started the engine. Even inside the car, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was leaving something unfinished, but I knew I had to go. I drove away, glancing in the rearview mirror. The ruined village on the hill grew smaller with each turn of the road. The wind still whistled outside my windows, and my mind replayed those moments when I heard my name. I told myself I would tell this story, even though I had no solid explanation for what happened. I could only describe what I saw and heard. As I made my way back to the highway, I noticed my hands shaking on the wheel. My heartbeat remained fast for a long time. By the time I finally reached a stretch of modern road, I realized I was gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. I don't know what that place was trying to tell me. I only know I heard those voices and saw those shadows. I never saw an actual person, but I felt surrounded by something that wanted me to share what I experienced. So here I am, telling it straight. That village on the hill isn't empty, no matter how abandoned it looks. The wind holds the past there, carrying echoes of people who once lived among those walls. And when I was there, I felt like they reached out to me. I didn't stay to find out more. I had enough for one day, but I still feel that presence whenever I think about it, and I'll probably feel it every time I look at the photos I took in that abandoned village. I still remember the first night I heard my name echo in that dark hallway. I was in my office, hunched over spreadsheets and trying to ignore the creaking pipes in the old building. It was around 9 o'clock. My co-workers had left hours before, and I was sure no one else was around. The place was silent, except for the faint buzzing of the flickering fluorescent lights. I heard my name. It sounded like someone was standing right outside my door, whispering in a raspy, metallic tone. My muscles tensed, and I felt a sudden jolt of energy rush through my chest. I stood up and walked to the door, but when I looked into the hallway, I didn't see anyone. The corridor was half lit, with a few lights turned off to save energy overnight. The corners were dark. I poked my head out and listened. Nothing. I told myself I must be tired. It was late, and I'd been staring at my computer screen for too long. I went back inside my office, but a few minutes later I heard it again. This time it was louder. My name, in a voice that sounded broken. I got up and stepped into the hallway again. The sound came from the end of the corridor, near the elevator bank. My heart was pounding, and I felt sweat forming on my back. I approached slowly. I kept looking at the floor, the walls, the doors. Everything seemed normal except that some of the ceiling lights were off, which gave the hallway a patchy glow. As I reached the end, I realized there was a door I hadn't noticed before. It was on the left side, near the last office. It looked new, but plain. A metal door with no nameplate, no sign, nothing. I could feel cool air coming from its direction. I knew that hallway pretty well. I'd walked it countless times, and I was sure I had never seen a door there. My stomach felt tight, and I had a sudden urge to swallow, but my throat felt dry. I placed my hand on the handle, expecting it to be locked. It turned easily. The hinges made a soft squeak. I opened it a few inches and felt a rush of cold air on my face. Inside, I saw nothing but darkness. I couldn't see any furniture or walls. It was like stepping into a wide, empty warehouse, but it wasn't big enough for that. I had the building's floor plans memorized in my head because I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to architecture. There was no room behind that wall. The space ended at the building's outer boundary, yet this door opened into what felt like a large chamber. The air was thick and smelled slightly stale, as if it hadn't been circulated for a long time. I stood there, unsure. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Part of me wanted to slam the door shut and run home, but curiosity pulled me in. I took one step inside. The floor felt solid, but the darkness was almost complete. I could only see a few feet ahead, thanks to the dim light from the corridor. I sensed the temperature drop a few more degrees, and a strange pressure weighed on my ears. It felt like being in a closed room with no ventilation. My heart was racing. I took another step. Then I heard my name again. It sounded like it was right behind me, but I felt no one there. My legs shook, and I felt an urge to get out. I backed away until I was in the corridor again, my hand still on the knob. I forced the door shut. I turned around and ran back to my office, locked it, grabbed my stuff, and left the building as fast as I could. That night, I barely slept. My mind wouldn't let me forget that voice or the feeling of cold air touching my skin. The next day at work, I tried to concentrate on my tasks, but I kept thinking about the door. I walked down the hallway at noon when plenty of people were around. The door wasn't there. The wall looked like it always had, plain white with a gray baseboard. I stared at that spot for a minute, then walked away. I decided I would stay late again to see if it reappeared. I told my coworkers I had a big project and needed to stay after hours. Some teased me about being a workaholic. I just laughed it off, feeling my nerves tighten as evening approached. By 7 o'clock, the office was nearly empty. By 8, it was just me and the janitorial staff. By 9, even they were gone, and the hallway lights started shutting down. I sat in my office with the lights on, listening for anything unusual. The building was quiet. At around 9:30, I heard it again, my name, in that same raspy tone. My scalp tingled. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and walked into the corridor. The partial darkness made it feel like a completely different place. I looked toward the end of the hall and saw the same door, that same plain metal slab. My heart thumped. My palms started sweating. I moved toward it, feeling each step land heavily. I reached out and touched the handle, feeling the cold metal against my skin. I felt a slight vibration, like the door was humming. That didn't make sense, but I felt it. I opened it. Cold air hit me again, and I saw the darkness inside. It looked the same as before, an empty room that shouldn't exist. This time I brought a flashlight. I shone it inside. The beam illuminated a narrow path on the ground, revealing a smooth, concrete floor. I walked in, moving the flashlight around, trying to see the walls. The space seemed bigger than the entire floor of the building. I walked a few steps, and the air got denser. I noticed my breath turned shallow and my chest felt tight. I heard the door close behind me. That startled me. I spun around and saw the faint outline of the door in the flashlight beam, still there, but now shut. I hurried back and twisted the knob. It opened easily. Relief washed over me. I wasn't trapped. I looked over my shoulder into the darkness. My name echoed again, sounding closer than before. My heart fluttered in my chest. I had no idea what to do. I decided to test something. I walked out, closed the door, and returned to my office. Then, after a few minutes, I stepped back into the hallway. Sure enough, the door was still there. I repeated this a couple of times. I'd open it, shine the flashlight, see the empty darkness, and hear that strange rasp in the distance. Then I'd close it and go back to my desk, trying to calm down. The voice never spoke, unless I was inside. Each time I heard it, my throat tightened, and my pulse raced. I started to question my sanity. I considered the possibility of an actual person messing with me. But that space couldn't exist in the building. We were on the 7th floor, and the outside wall was right there. Behind that wall should have been a sheer drop to the street below. Yet I was stepping into a room that felt like a giant warehouse. It made no sense. Over the next few nights, I found myself drawn to that door. I wanted to understand what was happening. I tested different things. I tried marking a spot on the wall in the daytime, no mark. At night, the door would reappear in the exact same place. I tried propping it open with a wedge, but each time I came back, I found the door closed again. I never caught it closing, it just would be shut whenever I wasn't looking. One night, I left my phone recording video in the corridor, pointed at the spot where the door appeared. I hid in my office with the lights off, waiting to hear my name. Around 9:30, I heard it. I hurried out to grab my phone. The corridor was dark. The door was there. I stopped the recording and played it back. The video showed the hallway, empty and still. Then around 9:30, the image glitched for a second. When the feed cleared, the door was just there, like it materialized out of thin air. There was no transition, no movement. It went from a blank wall to a shut metal door in one frame. When I saw that, my hands shook and my breathing turned rapid. This proved I wasn't imagining it. Something was there, something real. I decided to walk through the door with my camera rolling. That night I went in again and filmed the inside. I aimed the flashlight and camera at the floor. The air felt heavier than ever. I could feel my temples throbbing. My name echoed from somewhere ahead. This time it sounded more drawn out, like it was traveling a great distance. I followed the sound with my flashlight pointed straight ahead. I didn't see anything, but I heard soft scraping noises, like shoes dragging across concrete. I noticed my breath was visible in the flashlight beam, like it was freezing in there. My feet felt numb, and my hands were stiff around the flashlight. I walked maybe 50 steps in total darkness except for that thin beam. The further I went, the more I felt like something was pushing down on my shoulders. At some point, I lost my nerve. My stomach was in knots, and my shoulders were tense. My instincts screamed at me to leave. I turned around. For a second, I couldn't see the door. That made my heart jump. Then I saw it, a small crack of light. I hurried back, and as I approached, I heard the door slam shut. But I reached it and twisted the knob, and it opened. I stumbled out into the hallway, panting and soaked in sweat. I watched the footage later. It showed a shaky view of the concrete floor. The audio picked up those scraping sounds, plus the faint hiss of wind, but there was no visible source. The space looked empty. The voice on the recording didn't sound exactly like how I heard it in person. It was faint and distorted, barely audible. The camera never caught any figure or shape. It was just darkness. I started to lose sleep. My appetite went downhill. I felt anxious during the day, counting the hours until night. Part of me wanted to stop going there. Another part needed to see what was inside. It was like an itch I couldn't ignore. I began noticing small changes at work. The corridor felt colder whenever I walked past that spot, even during daytime. I asked a coworker if they felt a draft. They shrugged and said no. I touched the wall where the door appeared. It felt chilled, like a refrigerator door. I kept a diary of the times the door showed up. It always appeared between 9 and 10 at night. It stayed until I left the building. I suspected it vanished right after I was gone. I tried once to hide in the closet across the hall to see if the door stayed past midnight, but around 11 o'clock, I realized I was exhausted and spooked. I came out, and the door was still there. I didn't have the courage to wait any longer. I left. One night I decided I'd had enough. I told myself I wasn't going to open that door again. I tried to focus on work, hoping the voice wouldn't call. But at 9:15 I heard it. My name, that metallic rasp. I gripped the edge of my desk so hard my knuckles turned white. I forced myself to ignore it. It called again and again. I could feel my pulse in my throat. My forehead was damp with sweat. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to concentrate on the hum of the air conditioner. The voice sounded closer. I felt cold air on my neck, like something was behind me. The hair on my arms stood up. After a minute, it stopped. I exhaled, feeling my shoulders relax a bit. Then curiosity crept in. I realized the voice had never sounded that close before. It felt like it was right at my office door. I got up. My legs felt weak. I walked outside, and I saw the corridor was dark again. The door was there, slightly ajar this time. A sliver of cold air drifted out. I stepped forward, paused, and then slowly approached. The door creaked when I pushed it open wider. I didn't have my flashlight that night. The overhead lights in the hallway offered some illumination, but I couldn't see more than a few feet inside. I felt a wave of dread in my stomach, like my body was warning me. My name echoed from somewhere inside. It sounded different, as if there were two voices layered on top of each other. I felt adrenaline surge through me. My hands trembled. My breathing turned quick and shallow. The air in that room felt heavier than ever. I took a step back, then another. I closed the door. I turned around and walked straight to the elevators. I haven't opened that door since, but it still appears every single night I stay past 9. Sometimes I see it from my office window, reflecting in the polished floor of the hallway. Sometimes I hear that voice calling me, scratching at the edge of my hearing, almost blending with the sound of the ventilation system. Sometimes I feel cold air touching my shoulders, and I spin around, convinced something is standing there. But I never see anything. I've started leaving earlier, refusing to work at night. My manager complains about my reduced hours, but I don't care. I just want to avoid that corridor when it's dark. I've told a few people about what I've seen, but they don't believe me. They think I'm making it up or that I'm confusing the location of a supply closet. No one else has heard the voice or seen the door. It seems to choose when to appear, and it only shows up for me. That alone makes me uneasy. I wonder if it's attached to me somehow or if it only manifests when I'm there. I'm writing this down because I can't keep it to myself anymore. There's something in that building, something that isn't in any official plan or record. It calls my name, waits for me to open the door, and stands in that darkness, breathing cold air down my neck. I don't know what it wants. I don't plan to find out. For now, I leave the office before 9. I take my laptop home if I have to finish anything urgent. I stay away from that hallway whenever the lights start to flicker. If I can't avoid it, I keep my head down and walk fast. When I'm in the elevator going down, I sometimes feel a draft on my collar as if the air is following me. I try to ignore it. I'm not sure how long I can keep working there. I've been thinking about transferring to another building or looking for a new job. But the economy isn't great, and I need the paycheck. I keep telling myself that if I leave on time, I'll be fine. Still, every night I pack up my things, that tense feeling comes back. My hands feel shaky, and I wonder if the door is waiting around the corner. Sometimes I see the corridor is empty when I walk out, but I feel the air is cooler near that wall. I sense a presence, silent for now. I don't know how this ends. The door keeps appearing. The voice keeps calling. I keep trying to ignore it. I won't go in there again. That place doesn't belong in this world. It's cold, empty, and suffocating. Every time I think about stepping inside, my skin prickles with fear. So I do what I can. I log off my computer early, pick up my keys, and try to pretend the hallway is normal. I ride the elevator down, nod at the security guard, and walk out onto the street. I feel the tension in my shoulders loosen a bit when I'm outside. The wind on my face feels warmer than the air in that place. I still dream about it. I see that metal door in my sleep slightly open, with darkness beyond. I wake up with my heart pounding. I stare at the clock, see that it's 3 in the morning, and I remind myself that I'm in my own apartment. I'm safe. Then I remember I have to go back to that building tomorrow for work. I'll see the same corridors, the same offices, and the same blank wall that might not stay blank after dark. That's my story. It's ongoing. I don't have a dramatic conclusion or an explanation. I only know that some nights I hear my name in that raspy tone. And if I walk down the hall, I find that impossible door. And beyond it, Something is waiting in that cold, empty space. If you ever find yourself working late in a deserted building and you hear a strange voice calling your name from around the corner, do yourself a favor and ignore it. Lock up, go home, and forget you ever heard it. Because once you open that door, you'll never be the same. I got the call on a Monday afternoon. A client wanted me to restore a strange statue that came from some archaeological site. He sounded nervous and insisted that I handle it personally. He said something about unusual markings and a faint hum he felt when he touched it. I listened, ready to dismiss his concerns as nonsense, but I needed the work. I agreed. He showed up at my studio that same evening with the statue crated up in old wooden panels. When he left, I unboxed the piece and stared at it for a while. It was about 3 feet tall, made of a dark stone with a rough surface. The shape was odd, like some ancient idol with a humanoid form, but the proportions were off. The head was larger than normal and the arms were crossed. There were faint cracks around the chest area. The eyes looked like empty holes. I remember feeling uneasy about how the statue seemed to watch me, even though it had no real eyes. I got to work the next morning. I set the statue in the middle of my workshop under strong lights. I circled it with my equipment: chisels, brushes, water, cleaning solutions, and some adhesives. My goal was to check for structural integrity and fill any cracks before smoothing the surface. As soon as I pressed my hands against the statue's torso, I noticed a subtle vibration. It was slight, almost like a weak heartbeat. I leaned in, placed my ear close, and heard nothing. I touched it again. The vibration stopped. It felt cool to the touch, like any stone, but I could have sworn it had just pulsed. My forehead got damp with sweat. I wiped it with the back of my hand. It was probably my imagination. I shook my head and kept going. I spent that entire day cleaning off dirt and dust from the surface. I used a fine brush around the delicate edges. There was a strong smell of old earth on the statue. There was also a musty odor that clung to my gloves. Sometimes I caught myself looking over my shoulder, feeling as if I wasn't alone. I told myself it was just nerves. By late evening, I had removed a decent layer of grime, revealing more of the statue's details. The face was smooth, but the mouth area was chipped. The arms had small patterns etched into the stone that looked like lines and circles. I cleaned them carefully. When I finally stopped, it was around 10 p.m. I turned off all the lamps except the small overhead light in the center of the room. I left the statue there and locked up. As I walked to my bedroom, which was on the second floor of my studio, I heard a faint sound. It was a whisper, too soft to make out words. I paused at the top of the stairs, listening, but then it stopped. I peered down through the gap in the railing. The statue sat in the same spot, silent. I shook my head. I was just hearing things. I went to bed. That night I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m. I heard something scrape against the floor. I jumped out of bed. My heart thumped hard. I grabbed a flashlight and crept downstairs. My workshop was pitch black except for the moonlight through the windows. I walked over to the statue. My bare feet felt cold on the concrete floor. The statue didn't look the same. The arms weren't crossed the way I remembered. They were still folded, but the angle was different. I stared for a while, trying to recall its exact position from earlier. I placed my hands on it again. The surface felt warmer than I expected, but there was no vibration this time. I stepped back. Maybe I was mixed up. I decided to head back upstairs, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something in that statue was awake. The next morning, I approached the statue with a fresh mindset. I told myself to focus on the restoration, not on weird illusions. My plan was to address the cracks on the arms and torso. When I started, though, the stone in those areas felt brittle. As I brushed on a stabilizing solution, the cracks expanded, forming thin lines that extended all around the torso. They formed shapes that reminded me of letters, but they weren't any language I knew. I rubbed my eyes and checked my hands, making sure I wasn't applying too much pressure. The cracks just kept spreading. It almost seemed like the stone was reacting to the repair solution, I stopped and waited, feeling my stomach churn with unease. I stepped back and watched the statue under the light for a long time. My workshop smelled like chemicals and stone dust. The air felt heavy, like there wasn't enough ventilation. I opened a window, looked outside for a moment, and then turned back to the statue. I told myself to keep working. I used a fine-tipped tool to remove any loose flakes of stone around the cracks.